Good morning. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us. Before we dive into all of the really great information and material that we have prepared for you today, we just wanted to go ahead and share with you our baseline survey, which is necessary for us to continue receiving funding. So that way we can continue to provide these really great community presentations and trainings such as these ones. You can access our baseline survey by scanning this QR code featured here with your phone, or you can actually just click the survey link, which is going to be provided on this video or in the caption of this video as well too. If you have any trouble accessing the baseline survey for this video today, you can go ahead and email us at weexist@tarzanatc.org, or you can reach out to us at our Instagram at weexist.ttc as well too. So we're going to go ahead and get started for today. Today you are joining us for our LGBTQIA2-S Transitional Age Youth Toolkit training. And this toolkit training is specifically meant for the West LA and South Bay area. Before we continue, I just wanted to go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Liv and my pronouns are elle, they, and them. And I will also be joined by my co-facilitator today, Emme, who also uses they, them pronouns as well too. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So along with this space, we want to go ahead and just give some community agreements to ensure that this is a respectful and safe space for everyone. So we do have a couple of guidelines and agreements. The first being one mic, one diva. We want to be respectful of those who are sharing individually in the moment. Next, we have enough, let's move on. So sometimes our conversations can get a little, can be very in depth, and we can talk about things for hours, right? Because we're talking about very important things. So for the sake and the respect of participants' time, if we do have a conversation that we would like to continue, I will just say, I will just cut in and say, oh, we can actually have this conversation at the very end of today's training. We will be having some extended time, so we can go ahead and talk on those important topics and even connect a little bit later as well too. Calling in. So we are talking about some very heavy and personal items. So if there is any risks, instead of calling folks out, we want to go ahead and make it a learning opportunity for everyone. So we will go ahead and call folks in, so that way we can begin to have that conversation. And then of course, we want to go ahead and make sure that we were respecting pronouns, chosen names, backgrounds, and all backgrounds and experiences in this space. So we want to make sure that we are prioritizing that. Next, of course, we want to ensure that everyone knows that this is a safe and brave space. Anything that is said here will stay here, and we will ensure that. And then of course, finally, what is said here stays here, but what is learned here leaves here. So those personal stories, any thoughts or comments that are shared in this space will stay here with the consent of the participant who does share. But the lessons that we learn from those stories and experiences that are shared can leave this space with us. So y'all are probably wondering, who is We Exist? So just a little bit about ourselves. We Exist is a DMH-funded program, and we are dedicated to improving access and expanding services to LGBTQ TAY, their families, caregivers, allies, and service providers. So some of the different ways that we do this is by referral linkages to care for youth. We also provide peer and family and ally support groups. And of course, we also provide community presentations and great toolkit trainings such as this one. So now that y'all have heard a couple of things about us and you've met us, we want to meet you. So we want to go ahead and give y'all a chance to introduce yourselves if you feel comfortable. We would love to hear your name, what your pronouns are for today, where you're possibly joining us from, and something that you're excited to learn today. Yeah, so we'll go ahead and just give y'all a chance to go ahead and share those. And while you're typing them out, we'll go ahead and continue on. So some training objectives that we have for today. So some different things that we're going to be talking about include strategies for creating those safe and welcoming environments for LGBTQ TAY. We're going to be talking about clinical considerations and interventions for LGBTQ youth and their families and caregivers. And then of course, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up with effective methods for engaging and supporting LGBTQ youth. And so one of the first things for creating those safe and welcoming environments for LGBTQ youth is understanding terminology. So we're going to go ahead and briefly go over a few terms, beginning with sex assigned at birth. So sex assigned at birth refers to that medical term used to refer to the chromosomal, hormonal, or anatomical characteristics that are used to classify and identify an individual as female, male, or intersex. So it's usually that process in which a doctor or a nurse will examine us once we are delivered and born to declare whether we are male, female, or intersex. Something that is tied to this process is those societal, social, gender expectations, right? So when that child is born, there's usually that announcement of, oh, they're a boy, or oh, they're a girl, right? And tied to that announcement is those social gendered expectations. So for folks who are assigned male at birth, for instance, are usually brought up and conditioned to like blue, to like trucks, to like sports, right? And then likewise for folks who are assigned AFAB or assigned female at birth, there's usually those social gendered expectations to like pink, to like dolls, all sorts of stuff, exactly. So we wanted to go ahead and make sure that we brought that up as well. So that way that's in consideration of those two differences from gendered expectations that are socially implemented and sex assigned at birth.
And our next term is gender identity. So gender identity is someone's internal sense and knowledge of who they are in relation to gender. Some of the most common ones are male, female, and then there are more and more people who are identifying as non-binary, which we'll get into non-binary a little further on.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. So next we have gender expression. So gender expression is just how we want to be seen by the world, right? It's our external display of who we are. And so there's some different ways that we can do this, whether it's makeup, hairstyles, clothing. It can also be mannerisms and the ways in which we act or think, right? So something to keep in mind with our gender expression is that our gender expression and our gender identity don't always have to align or reflect each other, right? Can anyone think of any reasons or situations in which someone's gender expression and their gender identity may not match or reflect each other? So I know that was kind of a heavier question, so I apologize. If you're a little stuck, that's okay. So for instance, it could be for safety, it could be for protection. So for instance, let's say that a trans woman may dress more masculinely at her workplace for her own safety and comfortability in that space. So this is just one example on how someone's gender identity and gender expression may not link up or reflect, but there's personal reasons for why that may be.
Our next term is sexual orientation. So sexual orientation is that label someone puts on themselves in relation to the spectrum of romantic, physical, or sexual attraction. Some of the most common ones that we know are gay, straight, bisexual, pansexual, which we'll also get into those terms a little bit further on too.
Next, we have sexual attraction. So this just refers to that physiological feeling or attraction we have to another person when we are attracted to them.
And our next term is emotional attraction, which is that intimate connection that you have with someone. Sometimes this goes hand in hand with a sexual attraction, but that's not always the case. Yeah, and each relationship is different. So.
Oh, I see someone else is joining us. Let me look them in real quick. Okay, there we go. And next we have sexual behavior. So sexual behavior just refers to a person's sexual activity. Something to keep in mind with sexual behavior is that sexual behavior and sexual orientation don't always have to link up to, kind of similar to gender expression and gender identity. So for instance, let's say that we have a straight man who is having sex with other men, right? For the sake of financial stability, survival, right? To support themselves. This is just one example for how someone's sexual behavior and their sexual orientation don't always have to align or link up as well too. And now we're actually going to go ahead and break down our acronym. Em, do you want to go ahead and get us started for this too?
Yeah, so our first term, well, first of all, we use the acronym LGBTQI2-S because we are a Department of Mental Health funded program, and this is the acronym the county uses. They found that the intersex and two-spirit community their needs were not being met, so they wanted to explicitly include them in the acronym they use. So our first term is lesbian. So a lesbian is someone who identifies as a woman who is attracted to other women. And then gay is a person who identifies as a man who is attracted to other men. And then someone who is bisexual is someone who is attracted to two or more genders. Sometimes folks will use the definition someone who is attracted to both men and women, but the bi community has been advocating for folks to use the definition of someone who's attracted to two or more genders.
Mm-hmm. And next we have transgender. So trans can be a person who sex assigned at birth doesn't match their gender identity. So like we had been talking about a little bit earlier, some trans folks may use their gender expression to bridge that link from their sex assigned at birth to their gender identity, but that's not always the case as well. So I want to go ahead and bring y'all another pop quiz. Can anyone tell me the identity or the term for someone whose sex assigned at birth does link up and match with their gender identity? Just give it a little time.
Cisgender. Perfect. Thank you, Zuki. So the term is cisgender.
Awesome. Yes. Perfect. Yes. So cis meaning same or stagnant.
And then someone who's questioning that, that might be someone who might not know where they fall within the LGBT community, but they are figuring it out. That could be in relation to sexual orientation or in relation to gender identity.
Mm-hmm. We actually wanted to pose another question to see, about the Q.
Oh, yes. So a lot of times the Q in LGBTQ stands for something else. Can anyone tell us what that is? I'll give it away. Queer, yeah, exactly. So a lot of folks use the term queer to describe their sexual orientation or gender identity. Queer is sometimes also used as like an umbrella term for the community, but we want y'all to be mindful of the history of the word queer. Queer was used as a derogatory term for a really long time. So a lot of folks still have negative responses when that label is used. So we want y'all to be mindful of that. Don't use the term queer to describe someone unless they use it to describe themselves. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And next we have intersex. So intersex refers to someone who may not fit typically in the male-female binary boxes biologically. So there are hundreds of different ways that folks can be intersex, whether it is chromosomal, anatomical, or even hormonal. So for example, let's say that we have someone who has a vagina and ovaries, but can still possess those XY chromosomes, right? This is just one instance in how someone can be intersex too.
And then the last term we have is two-spirit. So two-spirit is a contemporary umbrella term that describes gender variance in Native communities. So each nation will have different terms to describe someone who is two-spirit, but two-spirit is the umbrella term for that. It is Native specific, so the Two-Spirit community has asked folks to not identify as Two-Spirit unless they are Native.
Mhm. Sweet, perfect.
Okay. So we wanted to talk to y'all about pronouns. Liv and I both introduced ourselves with our pronouns this morning. So some of the most common ones are she, her, he, him, they, them, ze, here. We often get asked, like, how do you know what someone's pronouns are? And Pink News put together this lovely little graph. So first, ask yourself, do they look like a man or a woman? If they look like a woman, a man, or you can't tell, it doesn't really matter. Have you asked their pronouns and shared yours? No, politely ask, or yes, use their pronouns. Gender expression doesn't really tell you what pronouns a person will use. So just being aware of that as you navigate your clients, the world, all of that stuff. We ask that y'all use gender neutral pronouns until you ask for someone's pronouns. Share your own pronouns. Don't act surprised if someone uses pronouns that you don't expect them to use. People notice body language, so just be cautious of the body language that you use when folks are sharing their pronouns. Use the correct pronouns for people. If you make a mistake, quickly correct yourself and move on. If a person points out that you made a mistake, thank them for that, because it takes a lot for folks to to do that work of putting themselves in a more vulnerable position to correct folks. And then also don't vocalize difficulty about using the correct pronouns. We understand that it's difficult, but at that point, if someone has been misgendered and then you're vocalizing difficulty, it puts them in a position where they have to comfort you. So not only are they triggered, but they also have to now comfort the person who might have potentially triggered them. We also encourage y'all to practice using they, them pronouns. The more you practice it, the easier it'll become. And you can even try it out on your pets. I love talking to my dog in gender neutral, what's it called? Compliments. I call her my little bear. Yeah, it's cute. But yeah, so try it on your pets, practice it. If you accidentally misgender someone, a good tip I've heard for folks is if you give them 3 compliments in your head using their correct gender pronouns, that usually helps people think of it and get more used to using those pronouns.
Mm-hmm. And if you mess up, it is totally fine. Perfect. There we go.
So it's really important to use people's name and pronouns. First and foremost, it demonstrates respect, understanding, empathy, and compassion. It also has been shown that this study that was released showed that compared to peers who could not use their chosen name, youth who could use their name at home, work, school, and with friends experienced 71% fewer symptoms of severe depression, 34% decrease in suicidal ideation, and a 65% decrease in suicidal attempts. The same study showed that even an increase in one of those places significantly helped with depression and suicidal ideation. So if y'all as service providers could be that one person for the youth to be themselves, it could really help with their mental health and their well-being. Youth who reported having pronouns respected by all or most people in their lives attempted suicide at half the rate of those that did not. And then another important part of it is that 14% of youth with access to binder, shapewear, and gender-affirming clothing attempted suicide in comparison to 26% of youth without access. So this is again about creating that inclusive environment and about allowing youth to be themselves. Yeah.
We also know a few programs that are offering free binder swaps, free or even programs to having access to gender affirming clothing. So if you are interested in being connected with those certain resources and organizations, please feel free to reach out to us at the very end. It's not included in this presentation, but we can connect you with those programs and folks who can do that.
So we have a question that is, what is a binder? So a binder is a piece of clothing that some folks who are assigned female at birth might use to flatten their chest. It could be used by trans men, people who are non-binary, people who are transmasculine. It can even be used by people who are cis who want a flattered chest look. So that's
Mm-hmm. It's to alleviate any gender dysphoria that person may be feeling.
So want to talk to y'all about the binary. So we've thrown around the word non-binary a few times. But when we think about the binary, a binary is relating to, composed of, or involving two things that are usually polar opposites. So whether that is yes or no, day or night, sweet or savory. And in our society, we have male or female. Non-binary is an umbrella term that encompasses identities that are not exclusively male or female. Some folks might feel more connected to masculinity or femininity. Some folks might feel connected to none of them. It's really up to the person and how they feel and how they identify in relation to gender. So some examples of that could be genderqueer, gender fluid, agender. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's even so many more like non-binary identities that like can fill up a whole map that like, you know, our gender expansive community is big and broad, and we would love to, you know, encourage y'all to explore that community a little bit more too.
Yeah. And with technology and things, the world getting smaller, there's more people that are able to connect with other people who might feel the same ways that they do. So that's how a lot of terminology is born, is by people who have mutual experiences. So it might be a little overwhelming knowing how many different identities there are for folks to choose from, but it just means that folks are able to make those connections and explore and figure out what feels best for them.
Beautifully said.
Do y'all have
So,
any questions?
yeah, so we know we just threw a lot of info at y'all. So if you had any questions, we wanted to go ahead and give y'all the space to go ahead and ask those. So yeah, we'll go ahead and just give it a minute before we continue on, just in case anyone wants to build up the courage to ask those questions. Ooh. Sweet, we're gonna go ahead and just continue on, but if we see any questions pop up, we'll go ahead and pull aside so we can address those. So now we're actually going to go ahead and talk about our gender unicorn. So first off, is this anyone's first time seeing the gender unicorn or any kind of similar variation? Oh, so I see one yes. Awesome. We love first timers. Maria says no. Cool. Have y'all worked with the gender unicorn or any similar variation? I know there is also the genderbread man, which a lot of folks are familiar with as well too. Sweet. Thank you all so much for sharing. So our gender unicorn here was created by the Trans Student Educational Resource Center, but it can be used by anyone. So it's just a great visual map for being able to see where we lie on the spectrums of gender or even attraction. So whether it's physically, emotionally, and then also laying out our gender identity and expression. This is also a really great tool for beginning to understand the disassociations from sex assigned at birth and gender, which is very common, right? It's hard to wrap our head around how those two things can differ. So this is just a good roadmap for anyone who's wanting to learn a little bit more about those distinctions, or let's say for a client who is in that questioning process, or even a parent who may not even, who is kind of wrapping their head around the community or even wants to just see their visual map of their identity. This is just a great tool to use with anyone. So we wanted to go ahead and give you all a chance to go ahead and try this out for yourselves. There's a virtual version of this, which I believe Emme is pulling up and going to drop in the chat for us. So we're going to go ahead and just give y'all a second to try this out. And we really want to encourage y'all to go ahead and implement this in your personal lives, in your professional careers as well. Oh my gosh, can't talk. But yeah, and then we're going to go ahead and watch a video now, and then we'll come back together after we've had a chance to try this out. So let's go ahead and pop on over to our video. And if I could get a visual cue from anyone just to make sure that it shows up. Can anyone see that? Oh, okay, I got a thumbs up from Emme. Sweet, so let's go ahead and try that.
The original gender unicorn was actually designed by Land and Pan for TSER, Trans Student Educational Resources, and you can check it out at transstudent.org/gender. The gender unicorn suggests that our gender and attractions are actually made up of multiple factors. So let's use our animated version to explore this further, starting with gender identity. Gender identity. So gender identity is someone's internal sense of being male, female, neither of these, both, or another gender or genders. Gender identity is basically what you just know that you truly are, because you can just feel it. For me, Ollie that is, my gender identity is male. Mostly. Everyone has a gender identity, including you. Gender expression or presentation. This is the physical manifestation, tricky word, of one's gender identity through clothing, hairstyle, voice, body shape, etc. This is basically how you present yourself to the world, or how you want the world to see you. Based on the gender unicorn, I guess my gender expression is kinda but not totally masculine, a bit gender neutral, and sometimes feminine too. Sex assigned at birth. This is the assignment and classification of people as male, female, intersex, or another sex, based on a combination of anatomy, hormones, and chromosomes. When we are born, it is very likely that a doctor or nurse will assign us a gender based on these factors. My sex assigned at birth was male. For transgender people, their sex assigned at birth and their own internal sense of gender identity are not the same, and so they may use their gender expression to help them feel more aligned, although this is not the case for everyone. And sometimes, doctors will assign a gender that fits best with what they can see or tell about a person. But occasionally, a person might be intersex, which means these supposed simple ways of classifying a person is not always easy or accurate. But this is a topic we'll explore in greater detail in another video. Physically attracted to. This is someone's orientation, or who a person is physically attracted to. So I'm pretty sure I'm gay, which means when I'm physically attracted to somebody else, they are usually male. So I'll slide this one here, but I think I'll slide these up a little too, because you never know. Romantically or emotionally attracted to. This is someone's romantic or emotional orientation, or who a person is romantically or emotionally attracted to. I guess it's like being attracted to someone's mind and spirit. Now, physical attraction and romantic emotional attraction sometimes match and sometimes they do not. It is also important to note that an individual's physical, romantic and emotional attraction to another person can depend on, and is certainly not limited to, that person's sex assigned at birth, their gender expression, and their gender identity. So this is an interesting one. I guess I'm romantically attracted to other males, but maybe females and others too. Interesting. Makes you think this. And that, my friends, was the gender unicorn. It's worth keeping in mind that a person's position on any of these scales can shift and change over time. And it's also fine for a person not to know where they sit on the scales at all. For even more details, like I said, check out the original version at transstudent.org/gender.
Alrighty, so that is our gendered unicorn. So we're going to go ahead and give y'all a second to go ahead and try out that activity for yourselves. and we'll go ahead and come back together in about, let's say, in about 3 minutes. So we'll come back together around 9:42. Alrighty, here we go.
The
Alrighty, it is 9:42. So we wanted to go ahead and just ask how this experience was for you with the Gender Unicorn. I know we had a lot of first timers with this new activity. So we just wanted to go ahead and ask, how did it feel while filling this out? Did you learn anything new about yourself? Or maybe perhaps did anything even surprise you? So I'll go ahead and give y'all a second to go ahead and type out, or feel free to actually go ahead and verbally share as well too if you feel comfortable. But yeah. Personally, something that I always really like about the Gender Unicorn is that it is something that you can revisit over time. Something personally that I've come to realize with my own Gender Unicorn is that it is ever changing and ever evolving over time. This is just a great tool to use, whether personally with yourself or even with clients, and remind them too that they're multifaceted, right? They're ever changing, and their Gender Unicorns are always evolving. Sweet. So we'll actually just, oh.
Good morning.
Oh, hi. Hi, Rhonda.
Hi there. So I just wanted to say I thought it was fun, and it was easy. It's when working with my clients, I could see it as an easy way for them to really kind of explore and express. So this is my first time. It's my first time using this, and I liked it a lot.
Thank you for sharing, Rhonda. And yeah, of course. We hope that you utilize it with anyone that you know who could possibly use this resource for understanding those different terms and even those different spectrums. So thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, absolutely. Sweet. So we'll go ahead and, oh, wait.
Does anyone else want to share?
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and continue on. So to close out our first half of this big section, we're going to go ahead and just listen to the story and experience of Chellaman. So this is Chellaman. Chellaman is a trans, deaf, and hard of hearing activist. And we're going to go ahead and just listen to him share his story as he went through his medical and social transition. So we're going to go ahead and do that right now. Let me go ahead and swap on over to his video. Perfect. Can y'all see that? We're good? All right, cool.
Hi, my name is Chellaman. I am 19 years old, and this is me today. Now this is also me. Now the person in that photo dreamed of becoming him. Now obviously it's been quite a journey to get here. I have had to make as many mental realizations as, I've had to overcome as many mental obstacles as physical. To become him, to become me, the man I am today, I had to make several realizations. The first being that I am transgender. The second, learning the correct terminology to describe myself authentically. And the third, realizing the difference between presentation and identification. Now, my mind has felt distant from my body since day one. I remember always longing for my body to appear more stereotypically masculine than feminine, and I begged my mom to shop in the boys section for me. And in elementary school, I was known as the boy named Rachel. Once puberty hit, I felt cornered into living life as a girl. I distinctly remember certain moments where I just would press down on my chest as if that would stop it from growing. But when my mom would ask if I wanted to be a boy or a girl, I fell silent. It was a catch-22. I believed that by saying boy, I would be forced to leave most of my feminine traits behind, some of which that I did connect with. However, there were so many characteristics associated with boy that I did connect to. So how was I supposed to choose one without losing bits and pieces of myself in the process? After 18 years of searching, I came across this term, genderqueer, relating to or having a gender identity that is other than male or female, is a combination of the two genders or is on a continuum of gender. Fireworks shot through my mind. This is it. This is how I've always felt. The next time someone asked me boy or girl, I said or. After finding the words to express how I felt, others started to pressure me into using specific terminology that reflected their own understandings of gender. For example, once I started to associate myself with the term genderqueer, many told me to accompany it with they/them pronouns. So I decided to test it out. But that all too familiar feeling of discomfort emerged yet again. I felt cornered. But luckily, that discomfort sparked a moment of clarity. Gender identity does not have to dictate what terminology and/or pronouns you use. For example, I do identify as genderqueer, but I do not associate myself with they/them pronouns. I prefer he/him. Which brings me to my last revelation, understanding the difference between presentation and inherent identification. Wait, what? Let's take a step back here. Presentation is the way that you present yourself. Let's say your mannerisms, to the clothes you wear, to your overall appearance, how you perform. I say inherent identification to indicate how you identify inside, regardless of how you perform. I identify trans-masculine by taking testosterone. Luckily enough, it's a huge privilege I'm able to have. But mentally, I identify as genderqueer. Again, the way that you present does not have to correlate to your inherent identification. And this is valid. Now, I could stand on this stage and rant for hours about all of the realizations that I've made to get here and to become him and to become the man that I am today. But I also want to show you the process.
Hi, my name is Chella Man, and this is my voice one day on T. Hi, my name is Chella Man, and this is my voice 3 weeks on T. Hi, my name is Chella Man, and this is my voice 6 weeks on T. Hi, my name is Chella Man, and this is my voice 7 weeks on T. Hi, my name is Chella Man, and this is my voice 9 weeks on T. Hi, my name is Chella Man, and this is my voice 10 weeks on T. Hi, my name is Chella Man, and this is my voice 12 weeks on T. Hi, my name is Chella Man, and this is my voice 16 weeks on T. Hi, my name is Chella Man, and this is my voice 20 weeks on T. Hi, my name is Chella Man, and this is my voice 22 weeks on T. Hi, my name is Chella Man, and this is my voice 26 weeks on T.
Hi, my name is Chella Man, and this is my voice 27 weeks on T.
Hi, my name is Chella Man, and this is my voice 28 weeks on T. Hi, my name is Chella Man, and this is my voice 29 weeks on T. Hi, my name is Chella Man, and this is my voice 32 weeks on T. Hi, my name is Chella Man, and this is my voice 33 weeks on T. Hi, my name is Chella Man, and this is my voice 34 weeks on T. Hi, my name is Chella Man, and thank you for listening to my TED Talk.
Thank you.
So that was Chellaman. We'll go ahead and just have a little debriefing together. Let me just go ahead and pull it up real quick. So you wanted to go ahead and grab your thoughts, some talking or some inspirational questions that we have for y'all is what part of his story regarding his gender caught your attention? Chellaman discussed his battles with social expectations regarding gender. What are some gendered expectations that have been placed on you in the past? And we'll go ahead and just give you all a second to go ahead and type out your responses, or feel free to go ahead and share with us verbally now too.
While folks are processing, one of the things that sticks out to me in this video is when he's talking about how once he started identifying as, I think the term he used was gender fluid, right?
Oh, genderqueer. Gender.
My bad. Yeah. So he said that once he started identifying as genderqueer, people told him to use they them pronouns, and that always sticks out to me because even within the community, there's so much pressure to like conform in certain ways, but it's important to let people just figure out their own journey and self-identify however they want to.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Also, too, I think it's really important to see like how much stress can come with those social and gendered expectations, right? And something that always really resonates with me and always gives me joy is when I see and we see those transitions of T for him and how confident he becomes and how much happier he is. It just gives me all the good feels. I don't know, but it always makes me really happy. Yeah.
Does anyone else want to share what they thought or if they learned anything?
I really liked how he just really took his time to figure out what was right for him. I mean, I've never heard the term genderqueer, and I don't maybe he put it together and said, "This is who I am." or maybe was something that was already, in existence. But just having the courage to fight to be your authentic self, which is hard to do. So I really like that. And I just also wanted to add regarding to gender expectations. I remember when I was getting married and I was allowing my mother and my sister to be involved in the process to help me pick out my outfit. And I was just completely mortified. I'm marrying a woman, and they wanted me to be in ruffles and ball gown, and it just wasn't totally my personality. And I just kept thinking, do you guys even know me? Like, this is nothing I would ever wear.
Mhm.
And having and this was 20 years ago, and having at least having my wife there with me during that process, and she was just reminding me, what, this is a special moment for them as well. So you don't have to pick any of these things, but at least let them engage in the way that they know how. So there we have it.
I think that's beautiful. Your partner like acknowledges the process in which they take to be a part too. And though it may seem a little pragmatic, right, where there's that tension of those social expectations, there's that willingness to still be there that is can be appreciated in those moments.
Exactly.
I think that was really, really beautiful of your partner to bring. And then congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for sharing. That was beautiful. Does anyone else have anything else to share too?
Somebody shared, to me, it was remarkable to hear that he had to prepare emotionally, mentally, and physically because it is a significant life-changing process. Yeah, there is a ton of preparation that goes into folks transitioning. And we're actually going to be talking a little bit more about transitioning in our second half. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. And someone else said the importance of allowing a person to explore and navigate who they are. And it sounds like he had family support. He was allowed to take his time to learn to love himself even more through the process. Yeah, having a support system where you can explore is like super exciting. I know in my network of friends, we call it aggressive support, where if someone like wants to explore something, we like invite them to do so with us, and we celebrate it with them. I feel like a lot of times when people come out, some people think it's going to be this like long and horrible process. But trans joy is a beautiful thing, and the trans community connects in ways that are incredible, and we celebrate each other, and I don't know, it's really beautiful.
Yeah, whether it's biological family or even that chosen family, just having that support system can mean the world. And as you can see in Chillaman's story too, it does mean the world. Just having that validation and feeling affirmed and safe in their skin is super important. And something also that I wanted to bring up that Rhonda had mentioned earlier too is that process of questioning, allowing yourself that patience and that process of being, maybe I'm a little too forward or ahead of myself, but that process of it's okay to not know, and it's okay to be in that questioning process and to be patient with yourself and even others in that process. Ash, who really lays that out beautifully later on, is going to be showing up a little bit later in our training as well. But I just felt like this was a good pinpoint for it as well too. So thank you for everyone who has shared. We're going to go ahead and keep.
We have one more person. Somebody said acknowledging his privilege while being a marginalized demographic. I think that's huge. We all hold different privileges. So even folks who have one part of their identity that might be oppressed, like we all have different privileges, and I think acknowledging that is a really important step to creating a better world.
Mm-hmm. And also navigating through those spaces to find what is accessible to folks who don't have that access. I think that's super important as service providers, that we navigate through these systems to find and to make it happen for folks. Yeah, so thank you for bringing that up. That's really important. Does anyone else have anything they would like to add or share? I can't see the chat box, so I just want to apologize for zooming through these. I apologize. So we're going to go ahead and just wrap up this really great section with understanding our terminology. Some important things to take away from this section is that some of the terms and definitions and meanings for a lot of the identities and terms we have just gone over are subjected to change over time. Something that's beautiful with LGBTQ terminology and language is that it is ever evolving and ever changing. So some great ways to work with this is to be respectful of the ways in which folks choose to identify themselves or describe their journey, right? Of course, we want to be sure, we want to always stay open to being corrected, and of course staying in the loop and staying aware of some of the different changes that do arise within the community. There's some different ways we can do this, including social media and movies and shows and different ways that we'll be popping into a little bit later as well.
Can I ask one quick question? So did you say that DMH uses LGBTQI2-S? Okay.
Mm-hmm. They even may have expanded it, and that's a really great question, Rhonda, so thank you for asking. They may even have extended it to being, to including the A for asexual or even agender. We are still in the process of updating our toolkit, so keep in mind that that may be also another acronym that has been added to this, this entire acronym. But I'll go ahead and just type that in the chat box while Emme gets us started on this next section.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So our next section is going to be about why we are focusing on LGBTQI2-S TAY. Yeah, so we just conducted a community needs assessment in 2017 of the West LA and South Bay area. And we found that there are specific service gaps for our community that are in services, peer support groups, family and caregiver support groups, as well as shelter. And then Liv, can you go back one before the, yeah. So of all people who identify as LGBTQ, 28% of people who identify as LGBTQ are between the ages of 18 to 24. And then in comparison to the rest of the population, not rest, for the folks who don't identify as LGBTQ, this is the age breakdown for them. So we can see that more LGBT people are younger. Some reasons for this might be the fact that there is more visibility, so more people are coming out. But another huge thing for that gap between the 50 to 64 and the 65 and up is the AIDS epidemic in the 80s and 90s. We lost an entire generation of folks who would be our teachers, our mentors. We lost an entire generation because this epidemic was ignored largely by the government. It took President Reagan 4 years to even say the word AIDS publicly. And yeah, so it's just been really interesting seeing history kind of repeat itself with mismanagement of pandemics. But I did want to point out that that's like one large reason why we are missing so many of our queer elders.
I mean, it's interesting to see it in the reflection of those numbers as well too. So, yeah.
And then in California, there are an estimated 218,000 folks who identify as trans. It's 0.84% of folks ages 18 to 24, 0.77 for folks ages 25 to 64, and then 0.63% for folks who are 64 and older. I do want to say when it comes to trans identities, I have given a few presentations to older adults who are part of the community. And a lot of the terminology is very new to them, but the experiences are similar. So a lot of this gap is access to information and access to terminology as well. Trans people have been around forever. It's just we are now getting more visibility than ever as well.
And access to that language. Yes, absolutely.
Then we have someone in the comment that said that is a very powerful point about AIDS and now COVID. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. Both of these pandemics affected people of color more than anyone else. And I think it really shows who our society values and where the resources are going.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for putting that out. Yeah, so national studies show that LGB high school students have a higher prevalence of many risk factors and behaviors compared to non-LGB identifying youth. So the reason why this acronym is just LGB is because a lot of surveys and data don't ask about trans identities. So sometimes they just ask about sexual minority. So some of these behaviors include substance use and abuse, bullying, dating violence, sexual assault, suicidal ideation and attempt, and then STIs and HIV, which we'll be getting into each of those things a little bit more further on.
Mm-hmm. And the preventions of those as well.
And then the homeless TAY count broken down by service areas. We're focusing on service areas 5 and 8 right now. Service area 5, they found 370 folks who were TAY who were homeless, and then service area 8, it says 93, but I also want to point out that the point in time count doesn't always count folks who are couch surfing or who are not receiving services or who might have insecure housing too.
Mm-hmm.
And then some additional barriers to accessing services for TAY who experience homelessness are chronic homelessness, HIV or AIDS, brain injuries, IPV, serious mental illness, chronic illness, developmental disability, substance use disorder, physical disability, and veteran status. All these things can create additional barriers to accessing services. And then I did want to focus a little bit more on this slide. So the Trevor Project releases a report every year where they survey youth ages 13 to 24. The 2020 report, they said that they surveyed over 40,000 youth. So we'll be using this survey throughout the presentation. But they asked for reasons why folks were not seeking mental health services. And this is split between cisgender, LGBTQ youth, and then trans and non-binary. So the first thing for everyone was the inability to afford care. It's really hard to access mental health services in this country. Yeah. Another one was concerns about caregiver permission. A huge disparity for cisgender versus trans and non-binary were concerns about finding LGBTQ competent providers. The trans community does not have, how do I phrase this? The medical institutions and mental health institutions don't really have the best history when it comes to trans clients. So there's a lot of stigma and discrimination that happens in medical and mental health institutions. And then, of course, transportation difficulties, fears of being outed, previous negative experiences, and then a lack of providers who were LGBTQ.
Mm-hmm. I just wanted to tag on to Emme's on that point of the concerns of finding LGBTQ competent providers. A lot of times trans and non-binary folks, while accessing those medical services, end up having to be the educators themselves, those self-advocates. And so it puts them in that vulnerable place to not only have to explain identities and gender, but also it puts them in that vulnerable place to have to be that self-advocate in a space that they have come to realize may not be the safest. So yeah, definitely.
And then the main service gap is the lack of LGBTQ specifically tailored services. TAY might be uncomfortable disclosing information to providers based on a fear of judgment. There might be a lack of knowledge of the available resources, and then, like we were mentioning, that prevalence of stigma and discrimination.
Mm-hmm. So now we're actually going to go ahead and just...
Before we go on break, someone in the chat said 2S plus question mark. So 2S stands for Two-Spirit, which we will show y'all a video about in the second half. Yeah.
I was more questioning the plus.
Oh,
okay. So go for it, Em. I'm sorry. Go for it.
you can go for it, Liv.
Oh, okay. So like we have been mentioning too, is that plus is to represent all those different non-binary identities as well. Well, not only non-binary, excuse me, I'm misspeaking, but those other identities that aren't reflected in the shortened acronym, but also those other sexual orientations like omnisexual or pansexual, right? That aren't included in an acronym as well too. So that plus is just to be more inclusive and to make sure that those identities are being reflected in our acronym as well too. I hope that answers your question. I'm sorry.
They said, got it, thanks.
Cool. Okay, perfect. So now we're actually going to go ahead and just take a little bit of a water break. We can stretch out our legs, get some walking in. So we're actually going to come back in 15 minutes. So I'm going to call it 10:25. Yeah, 10:25. Okay, awesome. So I'll go ahead and just play some tunes, and you're more than welcome to reach out to us if you have any questions. And as well, if we're missing any baseline surveys. Our baseline surveys are super important with making sure that we continue to have our funding so we can continue to provide these great presentations and training. So if anyone hasn't had a chance to fill that out, we'll go ahead and put that in the chat box for y'all. And we will see y'all at 10:25. Okay, bye. All right, welcome back everyone. I hope everyone had a chance to refill their water glasses or their thermos if they needed to. We're gonna go ahead and get started. Here we go. So this next section is actually going to be discussing stigma and discrimination. So I wanted to go ahead and just give a disclaimer and a content warning that this next section does dive into some more heavier and some heavier topics. So I just wanted to make sure that folks were practicing self-care. If you need to step away, that's totally okay. If you would like one of us to go ahead and check in with you to let you know once the topic has changed, we can go ahead and send you a private message, just so that way y'all can go ahead and rejoin us once you feel comfortable. Or if you feel like stepping out of the training altogether, then we would make sure to send you the presentation at the very end as well too. So we just wanted to go ahead and prioritize your self-care and your health as well too.
And then since most people have their videos off, can we get confirmation in the chat box that folks are back, or a thumbs up on the little reaction thing? Perfect. Cool.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. Way ahead in the future. I apologize. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and talk about SND. So LGBTQ individuals share a common history of discrimination and stigma that is imposed by predominant heterosexist mainstream society. So some of the different ways that we see this happening is in discriminatory laws, policies, practices, societal stigma. We kind of brushed on those a little earlier too. But we also see how these disparities lead to health disparities and service gaps for LGBTQ folks. And a lot of times we see these in mental health services. So we just wanted to go ahead and just start with, some 101. So what is stigma and what is discrimination? So where stigma is those attitudes and beliefs that cause people to reject, avoid, or even fear those they perceive as different, discrimination, in my way of understanding, is implementing or even putting that stigma into action. So it would be unequal behaviors or different treatment of another, that they perceive, or different treatment to certain behaviors or others. And so we wanted to go ahead and just, give some examples and how stigma and discrimination against the LGBTQ community does show up in different institutions. So beginning with the educational institutions, for one, we do see certain folks being unable to join certain sports teams due to that gender regulation, right? Even though in California, folks can actually join sports team on whatever team that they feel most comfortable and they identify as, right? But a lot of schools actually don't implement that policy. So we just want to make sure that there was that mention of that. Also, too, we see the erasure of LGBTQ leaders, historical moments not being included in school curriculum, and tons of other examples as well. Next, we have law enforcement. So, of course, we see a higher rate of police brutality and harassment being experienced by those within the community. We also see how there's the dead naming and misgendering of trans and non-binary folks implemented in those legal systems and in court proceedings. We see this a lot happening in asylum cases. Right, where it's that misgendering and dead naming and placing folks in facilities that reflect their sex assigned at birth versus their gender identity.
Can I add one more to that one, Liv?
Absolutely.
In terms of law enforcement, for a lot of intimate partner violence or domestic violence cases, if they go to the home or where the incident is happening, they will often treat the more masculine presenting person as if they were the one inflicting harm, even if they are the survivor themselves. I have a friend who was in an abusive relationship and they actually called the cops because of an incident that was happening. And even though they were the ones who called, they were the ones who were treated as if they were the ones perpetrating the violence. And that's like a common thing that happens with our community.
Mm-hmm. And we see how there's that inflection of associating folks with their expressions and how those are reflected in societal and social stigmas. in treatments. Absolutely. Next, we have religious institutions. So we do see a lot of implications of homo and transphobia in these spaces, but we also oftenly see folks who come out to those important spaces being often ostracized from those spaces and those important support groups that they once had connections to, being completely separated from their once very important support systems. Next, we have the medical institution. So like we had been talking a little bit earlier, of course, there's the dead naming and misgendering, and then of course of trans and non-binary folks, but also that implication of trans and non-binary folks to have to be self-advocates while trying to access medical services. We also see that HIV stigma still very much exists within our medical institutions. So for instance, gay men not being allowed to donate blood due to the HIV stigma. And then something that I actually did not mention earlier with intersex folks is that at a very young age, when intersex folks are born, some hospitals will implement unnecessary and unconsensual surgeries on that child to fit them into those binary biological boxes of male and female. We'll be diving into that a little bit later as well too. So now we actually just wanted to talk about the minority stress model. So some really smart folks at the Williams Institute created this model to kind of lay out how social stress for folks of marginalized or different intersecting identities can experience different impacts on their mental health. And so some of the different ways we see this is with external stigma, it can lead to stresses that disrupt processes for the ability to cope adaptively, being unable to regulate emotions, or even being able to achieve those positive interpersonal relationships with others. With internalized stigma that folks take on within themselves and internalize, we see this leading to identity concealment, self-hate, feelings of worthlessness, and even fear of rejection. And so now we actually wanted to talk about gender policing and what even that can look like, right? So gender policing is the act of imposing and enforcing gender roles based on an individual's perceived gender, right? So there's some different ways that everyone has their gender policed. Something that y'all may have heard is those gender reveal parties, right? Even before we are born, there's those implications of social gendered expectations, right? Where even before birth, we have those expectations placed onto us. Once we are born, of course, there's that the social expectations implemented when we are moved into the home, right? With those different rules that are set by us, by our loved ones, and by our society. And then of course, once we see children growing up, we see how children actually become the gender policers of each other, whether this is in school, in social groups, etc. And then of course, something really important to get to the core root of gender policing is that it is fueled and enforced by the gender binary. It is implemented so that we could support that binary of man and woman. So what can gender policing look like? Well, gender policing can look like a few things, right? It can be assumed compliments or even gestures. Growing up, I had a grandmother who raised me, and there would be that awkward moment where she'd be like, "Oh, I noticed you dress very masculinely. I bought you this dress because I thought it would look really nice on you." You know, something like that to like kind of push gendered expectations further, or even compliments, which can even look like, "But you look so good with long hair, don't cut it," right? Those small things can also lead and contribute to that gender policing that we see. Gender policing can also look like confused looks. It can be verbal harassment, threats, or even threats of violence. It can be the F and D slur. And then of course, it can also be physical violence and assault. Something to keep in mind that Emme was touching on a little bit earlier is that gender policing is a lot stricter for AMAP folks versus AFAB folks, right? Because usually what we hear a lot is like, oh, tomboy, right? That is usually something that is more socially acceptable versus someone who is AMAP presenting more femininely. And then, of course, we can see how gender policing can lead to internalized trans and homophobia, leading to the different stressors and effects that we see in the minority stress model. And then, of course, we see how this influences the way that society responds to everyday discrimination. Some everyday discrimination that is super harmful, impactful for trans and non-binary folks. A lot of cis folks may not see the harms in those and be like, oh, you're just overreacting, it's just normal. But it really does show up in that internalized stress and harm that folks do embody.
Liv, someone had asked, what is F&D slurs?
Oh, okay. So F&D slurs were referred to, I'm not really sure how to explain.
I'm just gonna say it. Please do not use these terms outside of this space or even in this space. The F slur is fag or faggot, and then the D slur is dyke. And it's usually because people will see how someone looks and their gender expression, and apply those labels based on that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Said AMAB versus AFAB. AMAB is assigned male at birth, and AFAB is assigned female at birth.
Sweet. Thank you. Yes. Personally, I don't feel comfortable saying those terms out loud, so I do apologize, but thank you, and thank you. So some additional effects of stigma and discrimination. We want to go ahead and compile a few of these for y'all, but I'll just read a few off. So higher rates of stigma and discrimination can contribute to higher rates of encounters with the juvenile justice system. We see this in an increase of exposure to HIV or other STIs. We can also see this in an increased risk of substance use and suicidal ideation. And of course, we see this in trans and gender non-conforming folks experiencing twice the unemployment rate in comparison to the generalized population. So we wanted to go ahead and just talk about some common stigmatizing myths. So we're going to go ahead and do these one by one. So beginning with the very first one is homosexuality is a mental disorder and can and should be cured. In reality, LGBTQ identities are just as mentally sound as any cis or heterosexual identities.
The next one that we have is AIDS is a gay disease, human immunodeficiency virus, or HIV. First word is human. It can infect and affect all humans. AIDS, which is stage 4 of HIV, is a developed syndrome that is a response to a lowered immune system for a person living with HIV. Yeah.
Next, we have lesbians don't need pap smears. In reality, anyone with a cervix should receive a regular pap smear to screen for HPV or HPV-related cancer. Growing up, I know that I got a series of shots for that vaccination for HPV. So anyone with a cervix should receive a pap smear, just to clear that up.
And then the next myth is that all trans people want to have surgery. Trans identities look different for everyone. Surgery may be helpful for some folks who are experiencing gender dysphoria related to specific body parts. But again, it's up to each individual. Surgeries are intensive and intrusive. So if someone doesn't want to put themselves through that, that doesn't make them any less trans. Yeah, also access to surgeries is limited for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. And this can also look with HRT or hormone replacement therapy. Not everyone who identifies as trans necessarily wants hormone treatment as well. And then finally, we have intersex is a rare condition, when in reality, it's just as common for anyone who, in something that a fellow coworker likes to bring up is intersex, being intersex is just as common as someone who has red hair, right? Where there's those commonalities of like it being associated as being rare, but it's just as common as anything else. So depending on the definition of intersex, the prevalence of intersex individuals ranges from 1 in 100 to 1 in 2,000. So moving on, we wanted to talk about some rejection protective factors and coping skills. In this rejection box, we see how family can commonly be one of the biggest forms of rejection. So family acceptance linked to greater self-esteem, social support, and general health protects against depression, substance abuse, and suicidal ideation and behaviors. We all can also see the rejection happening in community, school, society, and this can lead to shame and low self-esteem, which can lead to displacement, whether it's in displacement with our jobs, hobbies, relationships, home, and shelter. Up to 40% of homeless youth identifies LGBTQ, and 46 ran away after family rejection. So we see how important family can be. In the end here, we see some different outcomes on higher risks of substance use, STIs, cancer, obesity, bullying, etc. And then also something that we wanted to bring up too is that along with these higher risks, we do see that the LGBTQ community is a very resilient and creative one. While we have so many things that are piled on our plate negatively, we also can bring a lot to our community and our spaces to continue to grow even with that adversity that we face. And then finally, of course, we wanted to talk about how can we begin to combat LGBTQ stigma and discrimination? Well, some different ways we can do this is to think carefully about applying labels to folks, right? We don't want to assume sexual orientation or gender identity. And of course, we want to learn effective strategies for engaging that family support without compromising the LGBTQ youth, right? We want to make sure that they're in the driver's seat of that confidentiality of their gender or sexuality, right? Next, of course, we want to build a safe and protective environment for LGBTQ students, so that way they have a space to express themselves and feel fully available to explore that questioning process. Of course, also too, we want to be able to connect LGBTQ youth with stories and experiences of past LGBTQ elders, individuals who have gone through those same disparities and adversity, and show them that they're not alone, right? You could be the first person to share that story with that youth, which can really lead to an impact of confidence for that youth and validation. So next, we're going to dive into engaging with LGBTQ youth and what that can look like. So to begin with engaging with LGBTQ youth, we want to go ahead and make sure that we are familiar with LGBTQ culture. So there's some different ways we can do this, whether it's on social media, watching a few videos so that way we can wrap our heads a little bit better around terminology, or even coming to terms on understanding the current concerns of the community can be super important too. Of course, we want to use this shared information to build rapport and to let that youth know, like, hey, we get it. We've seen these certain things that are showing up, and we completely understand and empathize with that. And we're here to help you. Of course, we want to normalize thoughts and behaviors that fall outside of gender, sexuality, expectations, or norms. So of course, like, this can be as little as providing pronouns or even asking, hey, what are your pronouns for today, right? Making that client feel safe and knowing that your space is one where they can have that questioning process. Of course, we want to provide educational information about the developmental process. We want to provide preventative education on issues of mental health, substance use, IPV, and even bullying. Of course, we want to utilize peer mentors as part of the program, so that way folks can relate and even talk with folks who are very close to their age as well too. And so something that's really cool with peer mentors, us being peer mentors, so shout out to us, we can serve as a guide and a resource for TAY youth who are going through those same processes. We can provide support and encourage confidence and character development for mentees and help them through that process and show them that they're not alone. Of course, we want to go ahead and provide peer-led programs that can combat negative peer influences, whether it's drugs, aggression, or even ditching school. and also help them link to positive development outcomes. So whether it's connecting those youth to fun, safe community activities, or letting them know about safe support group spaces, that can mean a lot in helping that youth navigate through their community. Of course, we want to go ahead and make sure that youth in mentoring programs are more likely to excel in connections with family, social, and educational spaces. So some important key things to keep in mind when engaging with LGBTQ youth is do take youth seriously. Really listen to them and not be judgmental. So don't downplay their emotions or act shocked if they do share something with you. We want to make sure that they feel safe and affirmed in your space. And like Emme was mentioning earlier, nonverbal cues can be a very big indicator of that as well too. So we want to be mindful of those. Of course, we want to go ahead and encourage participation and opportunities for leadership, whether it's finding a program for mentorship programs or a leadership program, which shout out, we know a lot of those, so please feel free to reach out to us. Don't force the youth to participate though. So if you see that the youth is still a little hesitant on reaching or even being involved in the spaces, we want to go ahead and appreciate that and acknowledge that and give them that option, but let them know that it's okay to take their time. Of course, we want to go in and provide welcoming and safe environments, letting them know about the center, letting them know about other social groups that could be fun and affirming for them. And of course, we don't want to prioritize the comfort of non-LGBTQ youth or staff, right? We want to make sure that we're prioritizing their concerns and maybe even sharing those concerns with the rest of the crew, so that way there can be that conversation that's had. Of course, we want to use language appropriate to age youths and make flyers easy to read. Canva is great. We love Canva. This is a great way on, making the language more approachable and even making the designs of the things we share more approachable as well too. So of course, we don't want to use derogatory, insensitive, or inaccurate terms and use jargon or lingo that youth would not understand. We want to make it accessible for everyone. And then, of course, we want to use social media to recruit and even engage with our community. So don't rely on traditional engagement tools or expect youth to come to you. We want to make sure that we're reaching out and being in those spaces, so that way if they do end up needing those services that you're providing, they can just look you up and even access you themselves without having to go through another party. But if they do, then send them to us, just so you know. Cool. For another step in engaging LGBTQ youth, we have empowering individuals to practice self-care. Self-care can be super important. So youth who take care of themselves are more likely to make better decisions in life and exhibit less mental distress. We want to make sure that they know that their mental health is super important and that they are taking care of themselves. Healthy self-care can help TAY cope with physical, emotional, or psychological issues as a substitute for maladaptive coping mechanisms. We want to make sure that we are connecting them with that education and knowing what self-care, healthy self-care can actually look like. So now we're actually going to go ahead and talk about affirming practices that we can implement on a daily basis. So of course, we want to go ahead and review our workplace policies and procedures and institute and make sure that those policies and procedures are LGBTQ affirming. Next, of course, we want to go ahead and develop our staff cultural competency with LGBTQ community through trainings such as this one. And of course, we want to recognize and address any barriers to services that LGBTQ folks face. We went over those a little earlier as well too. And then of course, we want to go ahead and create an inclusive physical space. So some of the different ways we can do this can be as easy as revisiting our intake forms, right? Making sure that our intake forms reflect that our allyship. So whether it's as something as simple as making those distinctions from chosen name and legal name if needed, right? And then of course, making sure that pronouns are included as well too. And maybe even sharing with the staff so that way they're utilizing that individual's chosen name and pronouns throughout their visit can mean a whole lot. Next, of course, we have decor. We love LGBTQ decor, right? We want to make sure that our space has that representation and does show the youth who, you know, it can take a lot of nerve and a lot of courage to come into a space, and seeing something as small as a safe space sticker, or even seeing like a lesbian flag abstract pin, or even a poster, it can mean a lot for that youth being in that space and be like, okay, I can take a deep breath. I feel like I can be in this space. Next, of course, we want to go ahead and work on our language, right? So some of the different ways we can do this is avoiding gendered language. So for instance, like Mr., Miss, right? And instead addressing folks in gender neutral language using eye contact and pronouns. So for instance, how can I help you? Or excuse me, we're ready for you. We want to go ahead and make sure that we're avoiding using incorrect pronouns. And some of the different ways we can use this is, by using those they, them pronouns. So something that we didn't touch on a little bit earlier is, but they, them, I know we've been conditioned to usually think of them as referring to a group of folks or many people. But when we reel this back into the LGBTQ community, trans and non-binary folks may use they, them pronouns in a singular tense when addressing themselves. So likewise, we want to go ahead and implement these gender neutral pronouns on a regular basis, so that way we are being inclusive and affirming. Next, of course, we want to go ahead and avoid using other gendered terms such as husband, wife, in referring to someone's partner or even spouse. So yeah, we could use partner, spouse, or relationship. Next, of course, we want to go ahead and acknowledge mistakes as they happen, apologize, and take the steps to correct them. Of course, we want to go ahead and hold ourselves accountable as professionals, and also hold our colleagues accountable as well, too. There can be a lot of power in owning up to that accountability of mistakes. It does take a lot of courage, and it is a practice and trial and error basis, but there's so much that can be learned in that vulnerability. So I would just like to employ you to go ahead and explore that accountability in vulnerable spaces while we change our language.
I also wanted to add, when it comes to this, that we are all conditioned by society, and our society as a whole perpetuates systems of homophobia, racism, transphobia. So mistakes that folks make are part of a bigger picture. It's not like that one individual is a horrible person. That's not how it is. It's society as a whole, and like we are part of society, so we're responsible for changing it all together.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of that change can come with folks who do identify as cis or heterosexual, you know, normalizing that language. There's a lot in power with folks who don't have that same fear of rejection or harm. By sharing your pronouns, you're showing that it is a normalized thing, that there are folks that it's okay to be inclusive and affirming, and you could be the first person to do that in your space. Next, of course, we want to go in and talk about social acceptance. So some really great spaces that are really great for social acceptance and beginning to build those chosen families, or even coming to terms with that allyship and building that. We've gone ahead and compiled some of our favorite spaces. There are so many more that we will be diving into a little bit later, but something to keep in mind with LGBTQ centers and organizations, that they can be inclusive social venues to create an opportunity for LGBTQ individuals to embrace their identities and to find those who identify likewise with them and who can support them as well too. So I know we talked about a lot of stuff, so I wanted to go ahead and just reel it back to the group and see if anyone had any questions so far, see if any burning comments or compliments or anything like that. Cool. Okay. I'll go ahead and just wrap us up for this section then. So in this section, we've talked about terminology and how that's used by the LGBTQ community. We've talked about some of the different needs of TAY youth. in your service area. And then we've gone ahead and talked about how we can begin to develop those different strategies for creating welcoming and affirming spaces for LGBTQ youth. And so now we're going to go ahead and dive into our clinical considerations and interventions. And for this section, we're actually going to start off with a little bit of a history lesson. So go for it, Em.
Before we get started, quick water check. Make sure you are staying hydrated. Stretch if you need to. Cool. Yeah, so to start off with the history of the pathologization of LGBTQ identities, the term homosexuality first made its appearance in 1886, where it was theorized as a degenerative disorder. It was based on Darwin's concept that homosexuality was not procreative in nature and therefore considered psychopathological. And then in 1940, Sandor Rado believed homosexuality was considered a phobic avoidance of the opposite sex due to defective parenting. So we can see how a lot of stigma and misinformation has been spread about our community for the last few hundred years. So this is like an important thing to keep in mind when we're talking about our community and our community trying to navigate mental health systems. And then if we're talking about the DSM specifically, homosexuality in 1952, the first DSM, or the second DSM-1, yeah, was defined as a sociopathic personality disturbance. And then the label and the diagnoses changed from year to year, and it wasn't removed from the DSM until 1987. 1987 was not that long ago. And then in terms of gender dysphoria, gender identity disorder was added to the DSM in 1980, and it was replaced with gender dysphoria in 2013. So for the treatment for gender dysphoria, it's actually gender affirming care. So like helping folks align their gender expression with their gender identity is part of the like, what's it called? Treatment for gender dysphoria. I do want to note that any mental health diagnosis sticks with the person in their medical record as they're trying to navigate through life. So for a lot of folks, they need a gender dysphoria diagnosis to get HRT or different surgeries. But if you are a therapist or a clinician and the person is not seeking those services and doesn't need that diagnosis officially to access those things, we want y'all to be like mindful of giving that diagnosis, just because it can cause barriers in the future. Yeah. Liv, did you have anything to add to that?
No, but I think it's interesting to see how much the DSM continues to change. And I'm almost certain that this isn't the last time it will. So.
Yeah, I think the more that like medical professionals and mental health professionals listen to trans people and to queer people, the like more the things will change.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we also wanted to talk to y'all. Actually, does anyone have any questions, comments, or anything about the history of the pathologization of queer folks, LGBTQ folks?
I know it is a pretty heavy history lesson, but a very important one at that. So totally understand.
Cool. So we are going to hop into the coming out process. We're going to start with the general overview. So coming out is a lifelong process by which LGBTQ individuals share their gender identities or sexual orientations. It's not always easy, and it can expose youth to trauma. Some factors to consider when and if someone chooses to come out are safety, available resources, support systems, and also methods of coming out. Some folks choose to do it in person, over the phone, via webcam, email, text, and unfortunately, some folks are outed without their consent or permission.
Mm-hmm. And so now we're actually just going to do a little bit of an activity together. So for this activity, if you would like to go ahead and participate with us, all you would need is a sheet of paper and a writing utensil. Yeah, so we'll go ahead and get started with that. So you're going to go ahead and just draw a star and put your name in the middle. On this star, you're going to go ahead and make 4 or 5 points. There's 5 points on a star. And so just a little bit of an introduction for this. Let me go ahead and pull that up. Excuse me. On each of the points, you're going to go ahead and write. On the first point, you're going to write the name of your best friend, preferably not your spouse or partner. Next point, you're going to write your favorite family member. On the third point, you're going to go ahead and write your favorite hobby or passion. On the fourth point, you would write your favorite material possession. And to close this out, we're going to go ahead and write our dream job on our fifth point. So I'm going to go ahead and give y'all a second to go ahead and create your stars. If you don't have the supplies to participate with us, or if you just don't want to, that's okay too. You could just reflect and mentally follow along as well. So I'm going to go ahead and just do a brief explanation and reading on this activity here. So now that we are going to read the coming out story of one of the LGBTQ TAY and the impact that coming out has had on their life, for the rest of this activity, please imagine that you are the individual who is coming out and that your identity is as a part of the LGBTQI2-S community. If you already identify within as part of the community, please imagine that you are in this specific person's shoes. Alrighty.
And then this is a heavier activity, so please practice self-care as needed. Need to step away. We get it. Step away. But yeah, so to get us started, imagine that you are a 17-year-old and you're just starting to come out as part of the LGBTQI2S community. You've come to terms with your own identity long ago, but you've hesitated to come out to others until now because you were worried about how they might react. So we'll start with number 1 on your star, your favorite friend. This person has been your best friend for years, and you've always confided in each other. You decide to come out to them on the last day of school, confident that they will be okay with it and that it will be a great way to finish the year. However, your best friend is completely shocked when you tell them. They quietly listen to you as you talk, but they don't say much about what you've shared until your conversation ends and you both head home. You send them a text later that night to see how they're feeling, but they don't respond. When you try texting, calling, and sending Facebook messages to them over the next few weeks, but eventually you go the entire summer break without getting a single response from them. You see them posting pictures online of beach days and lunch dates with some of your other friends in the meantime. When the next school year starts, you run into your friend on the way to class and say hi. And although they clearly see you, they avoid eye contact and rush past you without looking back. Please tear this corner off your star or cross it off of your star. This person is no longer a friend you can confide in.
So let's move on to number 2 on your star, your favorite relative. Coming out to your friend didn't go as planned, but you still feel ready to try coming out to your family because you know that they love you. At a family birthday party, you meet up with your favorite relative and decide to tell them first because they have always been supportive of you. When you take them aside to share with them, your relative is disgusted and says that they don't understand why you would choose to be this way when your family put so much effort into raising you correctly. They ask you not to speak to them again until you've changed your mind, and they advise you not to tell anyone else in the family because it will tear them apart. Your relative rushes back to the party, and you decide not to come out to the rest of your family for a while. Please tear this corn off your star. You can no longer rely on the support of this relative.
Now, imagine it's later on and you've just started college. You've made friends who are supportive of your identity and even came with you to your school's big pride event. One day, you see a sign advertising a meeting for a student club dedicated to your biggest hobby or passion, which is number 3 on your star. You decide to go, and afterwards, the president of the club comes to you and introduces themselves. You start talking about how excited you are to join the club, but the president interrupts you and asks, Hey, didn't I see you at that Pride event last month? You say yes and tell them how fun it was and how accepted you felt. That evening, you get an email from the club president saying that while they respect your right to do what you want, members of the club would not feel comfortable around you if you joined. They asked you not to come back. Please tear this corner off your star. You are prevented from participating in an activity that you love.
Later on, you live in an apartment building with some other students who go to your school. One day, some of the students who live on your floor see you leaving the building while holding hands with your new partner, and you overhear one of them saying something offensive about LGBTQI2-S folks. When you return that evening, you find that someone has written hateful anti-LGBTQ messages all over your front door in permanent marker. Your apartment has also been broken into, and many of your personal items have been stolen or damaged, including your favorite item possession that you wrote down as number 4 on your star. Please tear this corner off your star. You have lost one of your most important belongings.
A few years into the future, you've managed to land the dream job / career that was number 5 on your star. You've been there for a few weeks, and while you haven't officially come out to your coworkers, you have a framed photo of you and your partner on your desk. One day, when your boss stops by, they see the photo on your desk and ask if it's one of your friends. You tell them it's actually your partner, and they say, "Great," and move along. The next day, your boss calls you into their office and explains the company is downsizing and you are being let go. As you pack up your desk, you notice that you seem to be the only employee who has been asked to leave. Please tear this corner off your star. You have missed out on an opportunity in your new career.
So we know that this is a pretty impactful activity. So we wanted to thank you for participating and listening. Something to keep in mind is that this experience does not reflect the experiences of everyone within the LGBTQ community and their coming out stories, but it does reflect it may reflect some of the stories and experiences of those shared within the community. So we just felt that this was a very important activity to practice with y'all. And so we wanted to go ahead and do a little bit of a reflection off of this activity to give y'all a chance to go ahead and share any of your thoughts, any feelings, any comments that you may have had. But if you need help kind of starting that conversation with yourself, we've gone ahead and compiled some questions for y'all. So beginning with, how did this activity make you feel? What are some thoughts or concerns you have about what you as this person experienced as they came out? What were some obstacles that you saw arise for this person? And I'll go ahead and just leave the floor open for anyone who might want to share verbally or via the chat box.
I mean, these are issues that youth that we're dealing with, that I'm dealing with, experience. And, that's why I'm, dealing with suicidal ideations, cutting, self-harm, drug use and abuse. Just as Michelle wrote, really feeling isolated and sad about their life, no hope.
Mm-hmm.
No one to turn to, no one to support, no one who thinks, looks, and feels like them, there to support their journey. So it's That's real life.
Yeah.
And I think that really highlights how important of a role that y'all as service providers can play in being that person who provides support and safety for your clients. Somebody else said, this is incredibly saddening. I can only imagine how intersectionality plays into this. Yeah, if we think about the minority stress model and like the different identities and how that impacts it too. One thing that I've been talking to a few of my friends about more now is the immigrant experience. So I moved to the States when I was 8 years old. My parents are immigrants. And I have a couple friends who are trans, whose parents are also immigrants. And the role that that intersection plays on top of it too is huge. Also like folks who have disabilities, that's a whole other intersectional identity that's added to the complications when it comes to situations like this.
Mm-hmm.
And then somebody else said, this activity is very powerful in that it presents a vivid example of how youth feel about coming out. Somebody else said, obstacles, support system, and coping skills, outlets start to diminish. Yeah, and then the last one I have on here is, this was a very hard activity. The first two were the hardest for me already, and I can only imagine how it feels to keep moving on while this keeps happening. And I began to think, is being me worth losing all the things in my life? And this is me as an adult. Imagine youth who are just starting this journey. Yeah, that's a huge thing. People compromising parts of themselves to fit in socially and not lose everything. And I think that's why it's really incredible when people come out and people choose to live their lives as themselves, even with all of this crap that's happening. If y'all saw yesterday, Elliot Page came out. Elliot uses he, they pronouns. He was a star in the movie Juno, also was a star in The Umbrella Academy. But even in his coming out post, he said that like the trans joy is real, but the fragility is also real. So it's coming out is like there's a lot of emotions that happen, because on one side you get the support of the community, but on the other side you feel all these pressures from outside the community.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I got another one. Someone said, when support systems begin to diminish, how difficult it is to find new connections and your world begins to crumble. We see this so much with our students, which is why supports and acknowledging they are important is vital. Yeah, that is super vital. And connecting them to other members who are part of the community is huge too. A lot of the people you see probably only, not a lot, there's a chance that the person who's part of the community that you're working with doesn't have any supports outside of you. Yeah. And somebody else said, I felt sad, alone, rejected, and unwanted. I think of the students that we support because this is what they are going through, especially now, even more during the pandemic. As school social workers, we are majority of the time the only adult that supports them. Mm-hmm. I really love the fact that you brought up this pandemic. Stay-at-home orders, a lot of our youth are not in affirming homes. They don't have anyone who they see regularly who supports their identity. Yeah, so it's really hard times. Suicidal ideation from the youth that I've worked with, I've seen an increase in that. So yeah, thank you for pointing that out.
Mm-hmm. And like that power that comes with that visit, how much of an impact and validation that those youth probably cherish and really appreciate in those moments. And when you have that moment with them, just feeling validated even for a second. But yeah, I totally agree. What this pandemic is very isolating, and even, suppressing in that process for them. So just acknowledging that and taking that into your into that space with them, and knowing knowing this whole story and knowing what that situation could even possibly look like for them. I think that that's super important. And I love all the responses and the self-reflections and everything that I know will be implemented for those youth to feel validated and safe in those spaces with you. So thank you. Thank you, everyone.
I do want to point out one more thing, since we are talking about what's happening right now in the world. It is also holiday season, which can be a huge trigger for a lot of people who are in our community because of that family rejection. So I just wanted to point that out.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And with that, we will move on to our next stuff. Here we go. So with that coming out process, we may be thinking, okay, how can we begin to help these youth or even help folks that we know with this process of coming out? And something that we found very helpful is something as simple as like creating that coming out safety plan, or even just like a coming out constellation, which for instance, like this one here, it kind of lays out all those different things to consider, whether it's resources that I can reach out to, who is support, where are places of support that I can go to if shit hits the fan, so to speak. What environments can I go to? What environments are available to me? And then of course, we also, something really cool about this cheat sheet is also reminding folks that aside from their identity, there's so much more to them. And so that's why in that interest column, it's really great to remind them of the other things that make up them and who they are. So yeah, we just wanted to go ahead and share this resource with you. If you're trying to jot down all the notes on here, don't worry, you'll actually be receiving this slideshow as well as this worksheet. So do not worry, you will have your hands on it. I'll go ahead and just briefly go through these different points for this coming out plan and why it's so important. So it's important with identifying pros and cons to coming out and helping them visualize that experience, what best methods would be utilized for them. Of course, it helps utilize and list resources, for instance, like centers, shelters, TAY drop-in spaces, food banks. It can help us identify protective factors and people. It can help us access and identify safe environments. It can also teach, develop, and utilize safe self-care techniques when they are needed to cope with stress and by incorporating identified interests. And then of course, it can help develop a personalized safety plan that can help you avoid dangerous situations and know the best way to react if and when you are in danger. So some different ways that we can support youth as an ally is to help LGBTQ youth identify adult role models, right? We want to go ahead and get them in contact with folks who have gone through this process before, or can help them provide insight and guidance. There's actually some really great mentorship programs in LA, one being Life Works at the LA LGBTQ Center, that can actually help facilitate that connection of mentor and mentee with a simple application. So we can actually connect you with that information if you are interested. Of course, we want to go ahead and continue to show respect and communicate support even through the processes of being connected to care. So something that Emme likes to bring up in the past with resources, like we've mentioned, there's a disparity for LGBTQ affirming resources, right? So even if we have to refer someone to an organization or a resource that we may know, or may not know is an affirming space, we want to go ahead and prepare that youth for entering that space and be transparent with them, like, hey, this is the only resource that is available, so we're not quite sure how affirming it is, but we are more than welcome to reach out for you. We will help walk you through that process, and just know that I see you for who you are, and I'm here to validate and support you through the process of accessing care, whatever it is. Also, too, we want to establish a good form of communication with that youth, likewise with that transparency. We want to be aware of our verbal and nonverbal cues. Y'all have probably heard us say this a million times. Nonverbal cues can say so much. Of course, we want to encourage peer support. at family or community events, and of course, social gatherings and even support groups.
And I wanted to add to what Liv had mentioned briefly, communication, honesty, and autonomy are super important. A lot of times people want to protect our community, which I think is coming from a good place. But I think like autonomy and honesty is the best choice so that people can make those decisions for themselves. Because there are a ton of really incredible resources that are not affirming. So if someone needs a resource to help them survive, it should be up to them if like it not being an affirming space is something that they're willing to go through for getting those resources.
Mm-hmm. And as service providers, I think it's important to mention that we can be representatives. We can be that person who calls and begins that line of communication instead of imposing that same fear onto that youth. I have made plenty of calls to spaces. I have advocated and been a kind of like that first voice that they hear to kind of represent that youth and to let them know, like, hey, this is who they are, this is their pronouns, so that way that conversation is had, and that way that youth knows that conversation has already began, like the ball is rolling, so to speak. So yes, thank you, Emme. Beautiful point. Moving on, we have family and caregiver experiences. So what this can look like when a youth comes out to their family and what that process can look like. So usually we can see that rejection or that coming to terms with understanding what that would mean, right? It can be a big shock for some folks, right? But not all the time, right? So we want to be respectful and keep in mind those different experiences. Of course, there's that seeking of an explanation. Sometimes there will be that, oh, what did I do? Like that self aspect onto how this person, identifies as who they are. I don't like to say identifies as, but who they are, right? And reassuring them that regardless of any explanation they can come up with, this person is who they are because of who they are. No excuses, no explanations. Of course, there can also be denial, which can lead to fear and confusion. And also too, there's that acceptance too that can happen, fully supporting this person and who they are and how they identify. So some common rejecting behaviors that we can see from overt to covert, we can see it being from covert as disowning or even removing the youth from the home to more covert examples of statements, for instance, like, oh, it's just a phase, they'll get over it, right? These are all different behaviors that can impact that youth and really shape the ways in which they see themselves and feel secure and safe in their environments. So something we want to keep in mind and think about is, according to the Trevor Project, LGBTQ youth who experience family rejection are 8.4 times more likely to attempt suicide, 5.9 times more likely to have depression, or 3.4 times more likely to use illegal drugs or to engage in risky sexual behaviors. Some potential channels of acceptance for families and caregivers can be family members or caregivers learning on how to embrace LGBTQ identities. A lot of times it's that misunderstanding or not really having that connection to educational resources like this one, right? Coming to terms and beginning to associate and understand sex assigned at birth, gender identity, sexual orientation. There's a lot of comfort that can come with education. Next, of course, we have family members, caregivers, and the broadened social horizons. So, of course, letting parents and caregivers know that there are spaces for them to build that allyship and to come to a better understanding of LGBTQ community. So for instance, there's a lot of parent, caregiver, and ally support groups that we love to encourage folks to attend and ask those questions that they may be afraid to. Of course, we have individuals begin to bond and come to terms with their differences, that acceptance of, I see I see you as who you are, and I appreciate and respect that. And then, of course, family members may begin to build social networks and embrace their child's identity, which can look like many different ways. So what are some tools that we want to share with families? Of course, we want to educate on how to be affirming. What does that allyship look like, right? And I just kind of dived into that a little bit earlier, but those support groups, it could be like following social media, learning the ways and what to say, what not to say, how to show your support, simple things like that too. Of course, we want to encourage involvement of children in their community. So letting them know about community events that are coming up that youth may really enjoy going to, encouraging that participation in their community, so that way they can begin to build those strong emotional bonds with other folks who identify similar to them and who are there to support them. Of course, we want to model that affirming behavior, our allyship, and showing that can be super important too. And of course, we want to teach the value and diversity of safe spaces and what those different safe spaces can look like. We want to consider the value of virtual spaces and communities and assist in assessing safe online spaces. So we all know that the internet can be not a very safe place. It can be kind of a weird entity that, folks are on, but not all spaces are, dangerous or, nerve-wracking like that. I mean, there's also some safe LGBTQ spaces that are specifically meant to be a safe space to discuss some of these different topics that show up for youth. So we'll be diving into those a little bit later. We have a lot of really great online resources, but to reel it back to this setting here, we want to be mindful of the role that the internet can play as a safe space when it comes to discipline. So a lot of times for parents and caregivers, when a youth is in trouble, we immediately think, oh, well, take away their phone. It's no longer a resource. They're in trouble. They don't need it. But we don't really consider or take into mind and how taking away that phone or that access to those safe spaces can be really detrimental or even harmful to that youth and separating them from that safe space that might be the only one for them. So revisiting that and also learning more about the spaces that youth is utilizing to build that support can be super important too. And now we're actually going to go ahead and talk about Intersex. So before jumping into Intersex, I actually just wanted to go ahead and ask if anyone had any questions on allyship or how to engage with LGBTQ TAY, how to build that safety plan, or likewise with family, parent, or caregiver resources. I know we mentioned a lot, so I'll give you all a second. Cool. Alrighty. If any questions do arise, we will address those. So coming out as intersex. So research shows and finds that individuals who identify as intersex are more likely to report gender confusion. So this may attribute to unique experiences such as surgical interventions with intersex infants that they were subjected to at birth. So those unconsensual and unnecessary cosmetic surgeries that they were subjected to at birth, right, to fit them into those binary boxes. Intersex individuals often begin their coming out process as they start to date or have that desire to date. They may seek more information on surgical options or even request hormone blockers to suppress that puberty development, excuse me. And so now we're actually going to go ahead and watch a video with some really great intersex activists and listen to some of their experiences. So if I could get a visual confirmation. Are we good? You see that? Oh, okay, perfect. Wait a second.
I don't see the video.
Oh, yep, there we go. Are we good?
Raise your hands if you have testes. I'm Pigeon.
I'm Alice.
I'm Emily.
I'm Cypher.
And we are Intersexy.
Intersex describes a person who doesn't fit the typical definition of male or female.
I have XY chromosomes, but typical female genitalia.
I'm a girl who has testes and XY chromosomes.
I identify as a queer, gender nonconforming intersex person.
I identify as a Black intersex man.
Intersex is not new. It's been around since the beginning of human existence. I mean, there's probably even intersex dinosaurs, if you think about it.
Transgender has to deal with your gender identity, whereas intersex has to deal with your biological characteristics.
Often, intersex people get surgeries that they don't want, and transgender people have to fight for surgeries that they do want. They gave my mom the excuse that the internal testes were cancerous, that I would develop cancer.
They didn't even come up with an excuse, basically, in terms of a health-related reason. They instead just said it was about the appearance.
A lot of doctors are very uncomfortable with the idea that I have testes, and they're still trying to get them removed, but I'm perfectly healthy and there's nothing wrong with them.
They did a surgery to remove my testes and told my parents to take me home and just raise me as a girl, and I didn't find out about it myself until I was 12. There aren't a lot of options, or medical providers don't explore other options. My mom would put me in dresses and she would be like, "Oh, aren't you so cute and you're so pretty?" And I would be like, "No, this is horrible." I was put on hormonal treatment, which consisted of estrogen and progesterone. I just wanted to belong. I wanted to fit in. I didn't want to be different. So even though I knew something felt amiss, I conformed. He was very condescending. He was like, "You intersex activists don't know what you're talking about."
It's difficult for intersex people to find each other because from an early age we're told not to talk about our bodies.
I did feel like I was the only one.
My doctors always told me there was nobody else like me, and so it just perpetuates a vicious cycle of shame and stigma that we can't break out of. I would tell another intersex person that you are worthy, you are lovable.
Your body is beautiful, you're beautiful.
Intersex people don't need to be fixed. There's nothing wrong with them.
I know you feel like you might not be able to get through this. I know you might have really dark thoughts, but I want you to know that meeting other intersex people and finding a community or a support group can be one of the most important aspects in your healing process. And we're out there, we're out here, we're here. And I just hope you can find us.
Alrighty. So now we're actually going to come back together and do a little bit of a reflection. So some questions that we had for y'all was, did anything surprise you? Is this anyone's first time learning about intersex identity? What are some contributing factors that influence unconsensual intersex surgeries? And then finally, of course, did intersex dinos really exist? I don't know. Let's talk about it.
Well, I didn't know that they perform these surgeries unbeknownst to the client or sometimes even the parents. That I did not know.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of times there's that framing that the doctor will say to kind of manipulate the situation and to even implement that it is a necessary surgery for the health of that child, which a lot of folks, of course, right, when they have their child, they're like, oh, anything to make the child feel, anything for the child's health, anything to make that child safe. But what isn't true in that situation is that a lot of time those surgeries is just for cosmetic, just to fit them into those binaries biologically of fitting more, more of a female or male body, right? and just implementing that gender even more so. So a lot of times we'll see this in what is it called? Elongated clitorises, right? They'll do an unnecessary cosmetic surgery to shrink it a little bit more. And there's so many other ways that they do that, but it's just so unnecessary. But the fact that there are still hospitals that find that necessary to do, while also putting that fear onto the parents to do that as well. I totally agree with you, Rhonda. Yeah.
I also want to give a shout out to Pigeon. So they had recently done a huge campaign in Chicago to get this hospital to stop doing these medically unnecessary surgeries. And a few months ago, the hospital finally agreed to stop, which caused like several other hospitals to hop on board and adopt those same policies. So yeah, pretty cool.
It's definitely still like a process for that fight for intersex justice that is still happening. And so I'm really happy that you did that shout out, Emme, because I'm actually going to put the handle for Sypha and Pigeon's project that actually implemented that victory. It's called Intersex Justice Project. I know that they have a couple of campaigns reaching out to hospitals, doing certain protests around the nation, just to advance that intersex justice. And so if you would like to go ahead and check out their project and the work that they're doing, that would be amazing. So yeah. Does anyone else have anything else that they would share? Any thoughts, feelings, comments? Questions? All right, we'll go ahead and continue on. And so how can we begin to assist intersex youth as parents and caregivers, right? So we briefly touched on that, right, is that medical aspect on actually determining whether or not this is a surgery that's needed or if it's just a surgery for cosmetic purposes or superficial reasons, right? So surgery should only be considered if your child's health is at risk, right? So for instance, if they are unable to urinate correctly, or if there's something that prevents a certain function from working, then that would be an essential surgery that would need to be done. But if it's something as simple as shortening a clitoris or any other reason, then that's something that can be revisited later on with that consent of that youth in the driver's seat, right? So cosmetic surgery can be revisited later on if that child chooses or wants to. Alongside this, we want to go ahead and make sure that youth are in connection with psychological services, making sure that they're prioritizing their mental health. So of course, support and honesty are key for that child's mental health. So one of the ways we can do this is with counseling and therapy, which should be continued throughout adolescence. So that way there's that validation and confirmation that there's absolutely nothing wrong with them. They're totally fine just the way that they are, and letting them know that too. Oh, go for them. Sorry.
Yeah, so the next community that we wanted to talk about is the Two-Spirit community. We did want to start off with a video of someone who's part of that community, so they can share a little bit.
Let me go ahead and pull that up. Can you see it? No? Huh.
Not yet. Oh, there it is.
Oh, okay. All right. Perfect. All right, here we go.
All right, let me just read it really quick. Two-Spirit, one more time. Though the label has only been used since the 90s, the concept of the Two-Spirit is something Indigenous groups have identified with for centuries. But what does Two-Spirit actually mean, and where does it come from? So what is Two-Spirit? It's an umbrella term that bridges Indigenous and Western understandings of gender and sexuality. You may recognize it as the 2 that sometimes appears on the end of LGBTQ2. There are many definitions and understandings of Two-Spirit, and each is nation-specific. The term was intentionally introduced by Native people with the goal of finding common ground and helping educate about traditional teachings in a contemporary context. The Two-Spirit Society of Denver offers the following definition. Two-Spirit refers to another gender role believed to be common among most, if not all, First Peoples of Turtle Island, North America, one that had a proper and accepted place within Native societies. This acceptance was rooted in the spiritual teachings that say all life is sacred. So how did the term Two-Spirit first come about? In 1990, in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, at the 3rd annual Native American Gay and Lesbian Gathering, the term Two-Spirit was proposed and affirmed by consensus. The word was a potential solution to what Native scholars and activists called the problem of naming, or making the many different sexual and gender identities that fall under the Two-Spirit umbrella legible across Native and non-Native cultures alike. For example, to illustrate the diversity of meanings that Two-Spirit contains, consider the following. In Lakota, the word winkte means to be as a woman and refers to two-souled Lakota people who transgress boundaries of gender from what may be considered male to female. In Dene, nadlehe means those who transform and refers to one of 4 separate genders: masculine-feminine, masculine-masculine, feminine-masculine, and feminine-feminine. Each gender has its own word in the Dene language. And those are just 2 nation-specific examples. There are so many more. Each nation's understanding of gender and sexual diversity is different and grounded in specific spiritual beliefs. Although all nations don't have a concept of Two-Spirit people, across those indigenous nations that do, Two-Spirit people were historically held in high regard and often considered sacred or divine, holding important positions like matchmakers, medicine people, or warriors on the front lines of battle. Many Two-Spirit people perform roles traditionally assigned to both men and women. Witwa, a famous Two-Spirit of the Zuni or Ihamana, was known to take part in masculine tribal matters and feminine tribal matters, and was even sent as an official Zuni delegate to Washington, D.C. Part of the reason Two-Spirit was adopted at the 1990 conference was because much of the written record on the indigenous nations of North America begins with European contact. For instance, the writings of Jesuit priests from the 1600s contain references to berdaches, which means kept boy in French, to refer to those who embodied both male and female genders. These writings often focus negatively on perceived cross-dressing among the Anishinaabe. The term is not only inaccurate in that it projects a European understanding of gender, but is widely considered pejorative by natives. Two-Spirit was an attempt at self-determination across linguistic barriers, because the existing language, foreign and imposed violently on the indigenous peoples of North America, was both offensive and deeply colonial in its gaze. European colonizers imposed homophobia, rigid binary gender roles, and misogyny under the guise of civilizing indigenous people through the Christian tradition in residential schools and beyond. As a result, indigenous people were robbed not only of their land, but of their spiritual traditions and way of life regarding Two-Spirit people. Many nations came to forbid and punish Two-Spirit unions and self-expression. In recent years, many Native people are returning to their Two-Spirit traditions as a way to heal from the injustices the American colonial project has visited upon their ancestors and traditions. In 2011, the first known U.S. Two-Spirit powwow was organized by the Bay Area American Indian Two-Spirits. Since then, powwows honoring Two-Spirits have been held in Montana and Kansas. And in March of 2017, the largest powwow in the U.S., the Gathering of Nations, honored Two-Spirit people during its grand entry. Two-Spirit identity is resilient and precious. It has survived centuries of colonial violence and prejudice. These sacred ways of knowing live on amongst Native youth seeking to know more about themselves, elders who have kept the traditions alive in spite of the odds, and anyone in between. It should go without saying, but Two-Spirit is not a poetic way for non-Native LGBTQ people to express themselves. We're looking at you, Jason Mraz. It is, however, a sacred tradition among the first peoples of this land we call Turtle Island that all of its inhabitants should know about and respect.
Perfect. Thank you, Liv. So I wanted to open it up back to y'all. Did y'all learn anything? What did you think of the video? Yeah, is this your first time hearing about Two-Spirit folks? And then how has colonization played a role in the erasure of gender expansive identities? Anyone would like to share?
I really love how they mention how Western colonial principles are really what ostracized Two-Spirit and other third gender and gender expansive identities can look like, and how those are often erased or even not accorded in historical like documents. And so it's like an educational erasure and then like a social erasure. But yeah.
So we have some folks who have heard of Two-Spirit, some folks who have not. Yeah, so this is just our basic introduction. I do also want to point out that I'm not part of the Native community and I don't identify as Two-Spirit. So the like knowledge and information that I'm passing on to y'all is like secondhand. So I did want to put that disclaimer out there. Yeah, Liv, I think we are good to
All right.
So there is this concept from what I've read that instead of coming out, Two-Spirit folks come in. So they say coming in is an act of returning fully present in ourselves to resume our place as a valued part of our families, cultures, communities, and lands in connection with all our relations. Historically speaking, Two-Spirit folks were highly regarded. They were frontline warriors. They were medicine people. They're representatives of their community. And I think today I want to point out Oshtish, which is the bottom photo. They are from the Crow Nation. So Oshtish translates to finds them and kills them. For most of her life, Oshtish took on roles that were considered women's work. This included artist, medicine woman, shaman, and craftswoman. She earned her name in 1876 during an emergency battle where she put on men's clothes and joined the Crow warriors in the Battle of Rosebud against the Lakota. Amber alert, I just got it too. However, in the 1890s, Oshtish and two other Two-Spirit folks were targeted by an agent of the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs. They were imprisoned, their hair was cut, and they were forced to wear men's clothing. So that kind of shows part of the role of colonization for this individual. And then we also have a photo, a painting, to share with y'all too. This is a heavier story, so please practice self-care as needed. This painting is the story of Captain Vasco Núñez de Balboa, the Spanish conquistador, who in 1513, during the course of his journeys, discovered a group of indigenous men in Panama who had engaged in homosexual relations. He took the men to a nearby mountain clearing, had the men stripped naked, and then set his dogs on them, allowing the animals to tear the men to shreds. Various chronicles of the Spanish conquest of the Americas provide accounts of homosexuality among several indigenous peoples inhabiting the region, an element which, brought together with others, served to provide moral justification for the genocide which marked the conquest. So again, it's this role of colonization in erasing an entire identity, which, like the video said, speaks volumes to the resiliency of the Two-Spirit communities and like the resiliency of their ancestors and their ability to like carry on the information and pass it to current generations. I know that was really heavy. Does anyone have any thoughts, comments, questions so far? While y'all are typing that out, Two-Spirit is Native specific. However, there are a ton of cultures outside of North America that have gender diversity. We have a few of them listed here. One of the most famous one is the Hijra in India, which this is a photo of some community members who had, I believe, opened a trans/Hijra hotel. Yeah. And then PBS actually put together a map of gender diversity all across the world. And it's an interactive map. So you can click on each of these little dots and it'll give you information about the history of the place and the history of gender diversity, which I think is really cool. And it also goes to show that gender diverse folks have existed all throughout time. Yeah, we're not new. We've been here. Yeah.
We are international. We are everywhere.
Intergenerational, international.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone have any questions before before we split for lunch? Would anyone like to share their thoughts of anything that we've learned so far, or share any questions? If anyone has questions that they want us to address, please private message them to Liv or myself, and we can address them after lunch. With that being said, let us come back at 12:30. 38 minutes. Yeah.
All right, everyone. All right, everyone. So it is 12:30. We're going to go ahead and come right back together, allow some folks to trickle back in. For folks who do join us, if you want to go ahead and just type in the chat box that you are here with us, just so that way we know that everyone came back and are ready to go.
While y'all are typing, I do have something to share that someone has shared. So someone sent me a message saying, I am half Indian and I really appreciate you bringing up the acceptance of gender diversity across the world. This is often left out in trainings. I feel like the non-acceptance of gender diversity is unfortunately a Western value that we have to fight hard to change. I have personal experience with the Hijra community. They are a valued portion of society in Pakistan and India. So just wanted to share that with y'all. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. Alrighty, so we're gonna go ahead and hop right into it. And we're gonna go ahead and talk about some safety concerns. So this section is actually a little bit heavier than the previous ones. So like you've been hearing us mention, self-care is super important. So you wanna make sure that you all are practicing that in these spaces too. In the different ways that we had mentioned earlier, whether it's leaving the space and letting either Emme or myself know to let you know when the topic has changed, or we can connect you with this presentation at the very end and the recording if you prefer. So some of the different safety concerns that show up for our community include discrimination and harassment, mental illness, substance use, and of course, family rejection. And something we wanted to keep in mind is that suicide is the second leading cause after car crashes amongst young folks ages 10 to 24. So in this graph here that you'll see to our right, we see how there are already really high numbers for cis folks for those who have considered and even attempted suicide, with the numbers being 34 and 11. But when we change the frame and focus in on trans and non-binary folks, we see these numbers escalate. So from 34% all the way up to 52, and from 11 to 21. And so these numbers are pretty significant and, really impactful in showing like who's, who and how folks are impacted. Something to take away as well too is that LGB youth are 3 times more likely to contemplate suicide and 5 times more likely to have attempted in comparison to their straight peers. So in this graph here, we want to go ahead and show you the distinctions of those who have experienced, whether it be discrimination, physical harm, attempts to change sexual orientation or gender identity. And then of course, conversion therapy, how these numbers are exponentially much higher than those who have not experienced these same safety concerns. And so how do we begin to prevent, right? What does the prevention look like? Well, of course, we can take a family-oriented approach or even a chosen family approach, right? Making sure that folks are in connection with supportive folks in times of need. And of course, we want to make sure that we're providing accurate information on sexual orientation and gender identity for parents and caregivers earlier on, right? That there's a lot of support that can come with that education and learning and having a better understanding of those terms. Of course, we want to help parents and caregivers understand that reacting with ambivalence and rejection contributes to the increase of safety concerns and those health risks for LGBTQ youth. Of course, we want to utilize trauma-informed care by utilizing and understanding our minority stress model. And then, of course, we want to identify the strength. We want to identify and strengthen supports outside of the family of origin. So with that chosen family and that build of community. So for clients or folks that we may know who are in need of those crises resources, the two that we really do encourage folks to become in connection with is Trans Lifeline and the Trevor Project. Specifically with the Trans Lifeline, this resource has trans and gender expansive identifying call operators. So they are available, I believe, 24/7 for folks to reach out and express any concerns that they have. These folks are available as well. And then we also have the Trevor Project, which is likewise a same crisis line that is available for anyone within the community to reach out to as well too.
We also wanted to touch on bullying and harassment. So bullying is an unwanted aggressive behavior that involves real or perceived power imbalance. It can lead to physical, psychological, psychosocial, and social harm to victims. And it can also take many forms: physical, verbal, social, emotional, and one of the really big ones for our youth today is cyberbullying. So bullying can look different for LGBTQ folks. For example, it could be dead naming or misgendering. Oftentimes, if someone, when someone is trans, they might choose a new name. That becomes their chosen name. Their old name becomes their dead name. So using someone's old name is called dead naming them. Misgendering is using the wrong pronouns. And then there's physical and verbal harassment. And then outside of school, there's online cyberbullying, as well as like this, the ability to out folks to their parents or other family members. That's another form of bullying. And then if you split it up between verbal and physical harassment, we can see that verbal harassment usually happens at higher rates, which makes sense because it's a lot less obvious, and it's a lot less, like, it's harder to prove that it happened, if that makes sense. And then we can see it split by sexual orientation, gender expression, and gender. And then we also wanted to show y'all a chart of places that youth feel uncomfortable in school. or spaces that they avoid. As you can see, like they're avoiding a lot of different spaces. Number one, 42.7% of LGBTQ students avoid bathrooms, locker rooms, PE/gym class. All of these spaces are not great for our community, and the numbers really show that. So I want y'all to like look at these different categories and think like where else can students go? If we're not talking about like if you take away bathrooms, locker rooms, PE/gym class, cafeterias, athletic fields, school buses, hallways, school grounds, where can our youth go? Yeah.
Something I want to mention too is that these spaces, specifically with the highest numbers, are the most gendered spaces at schools and education spaces. If you think about it, gendered bathrooms, gendered locker rooms, gendered physical spaces that folks can be in. So I just really wanted to add to Emme's point that, yeah, what spaces do folks have to go to? And if you notice that your child's school doesn't have a GSA or a gender sexual alliance, is that what it's currently called? I can't remember. But if your school doesn't...
Gender and Sexuality Alliance?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, yes. Or like a GSA that's available as a safe space for LGBTQ folks. Just beginning that conversation of being like, hey, how can we begin to have this happen? You could be the first person who implements that change, or even that thought process that staff at that school may have not even realized was needed. So, yeah.
And then in terms of preventing bullying, it's important to provide educational workshops about bullying for staff, volunteers, and caregivers. It's important to enforce anti-bullying procedures, promoting programs that encourage acceptance of diversity, empathy, respect, and for others and accountability. Again, that piece about accountability and creating this better world together, and then increasing protective factors. And then we also wanted to talk about hate crimes. So national approach to that sexual orientation is the third highest ranking motivator of hate crime incidents. Can anyone tell us what numbers 1 and 2 are? Any guesses? So number 1 is race. Number 2 is religion. And number 3 is sexual orientation. And then back in 2016, an FBI investigation showed the 5% increase in hate crimes against our community from 2015 to 2016. If you think back to that time, there were a lot of things happening in society that normalized hate speech against our community. Very similar things that are happening now. This year is the most violent and deadly year on record for trans folks in our country. So it's interesting to see the mirror from 4 years ago to this year, and normalizing hate speech. Yeah.
And we'll definitely dive into like who is the most impacted within the community as well.
Yeah. So in LA County, in terms of sexual orientation hate crimes, we see that it is highest among folks who are gay, and then in terms of gender, it's highest for folks who are trans women. So it goes back into this idea of more strict gender policing of folks who are assigned male at birth. Yeah, we can see it throughout all of it. The hate crimes are there for our entire community, but it disproportionately affects folks who are assigned male at birth. And then the violence against the trans community disproportionately affects trans women of color, specifically Black trans women. So we have an image of, is that the next one? Yeah. So this is an image of all of the folks who were on record who were murdered last year, who are trans. As we can see, most of them are trans femme, most of them are Black trans women. So that is the part of our community that is the most impacted. Yeah, so someone said, is there information on who are the biggest perpetrators of trans violence? That is an excellent question. A lot of trans violence happens in intimate partner violence situations. We can look more into it though and provide that information. Unless, Liv, do you have ideas?
I wouldn't have that information on hand, but that would be an interesting thing to look into. And I'm almost certain that there are studies that have conducted investigations on that. So thank you for bringing that up, Brittany.
Thank you. In terms of preventing hate crimes, an important law to know is the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Crimes Prevention Act. It was passed back in 2008. Matthew Shepard and James Byrd were both gay folks who were murdered because of their sexual orientation. So in 2008, Obama signed into law the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Crimes Prevention Act, which expanded the definition of hate crimes to include our community, which allowed for funding, like hate crime specific funding, to be allocated to our community. So that's one thing that y'all should know. And then it's important to enforce anti-violence interventions and accommodations for LGBTQ folks and people of color. It's important to train staff to report and assist survivors appropriately, and then advocate for staff diversity trainings to increase awareness of LGBTQ issues.
And so now we're actually going to go ahead and give a chance to talk about IPV, or intimate partner violence. So like earlier we had just mentioned, IPV includes physical and sexual violence, and it can also include stalking and psychological aggression a person can experience by a current or even former intimate partner. So in these different visuals that we have to the right here, we see how who and how folks are impacted, with 44% of lesbian women experiencing IPV, 35% of straight women experiencing IPV, and then right there in the middle, we see the highest number with 61% of bisexual women experiencing IPV. So we can see how bisexual women are experiencing IPV from both angles there, and likewise with bisexual men, we see how they're the highest number, 37% of experiencing IPV within their relationships as well too. And so something to take away from this is that 1 in 10 LGBTQ survivors of IPV have experienced sexual assault from those partners. So IPV and trans and non-binary folks. So we've just compiled a few statistics for y'all to go ahead and take away, and how IPV impacts the trans and non-binary community. We see that half trans folks and bisexual women will experience sexual violence at some point in their lives. That's very alarming. 47% of folks who identify as trans are sexually assaulted at some point in their life. 54% of trans folks experience some form of IPV. And then of course, finally, 77% of trans folks involved in sex work or in the sex industry. And 72% of those who have experienced homelessness have experienced some form of IPV. In this chart here, we wanted to go ahead and show how LGBTQ folks within the high school demographic have experienced different forms of trauma in relation to IPV, or dating and sexual violence, in LA. So we see how with their straight peers, these numbers are already pretty high, but when we escalate it and shift the focus to LGB folks, so folks of a sexual minority, we see these numbers rocket. Something that I also wanted to point out too is the fact that we don't have the numbers reflecting trans and non-binary folks here, but those numbers would probably be escalated and just as high as well too. So this little graphic is actually our power and control wheel when looking at IPV related LGBTQ relationships, toxicities, and certain forms of different forms of IPV that are done in different LGBTQ relationships. And so there's so many, but one that I wanted to go ahead and point out was HIV related abuse. So threatening to reveal someone's HIV status to others, blaming the partner for having HIV, or even withholding medical and social services, telling their partner and gaslighting them into telling them that they are dirty, or even using illness to justify abuse. There's also the one with using children, of threats or actions to take the children away or having them removed from the household, using children to relay messages of threats or actual harm to children, threats to the children or others to jeopardize the parent-child relationship, custody, or relationships with family, friends, school, or others. So we can just really see how IPV can show up in all the different forms and the manipulations that can really affect those in those toxic relationships. And then, of course, we want to go ahead and talk about prevention and how we can combat IPV. One of the biggest ways we can do this is by educating youth on safe and healthy relationships. A lot of times, youth who come from a DV or domestic violent household usually don't have the models or know what a healthy or safe relationship looks like. So providing them with that frame and that model for what those healthy and safe relationships could look like. Of course, we want to engage influential adults and peers. We want to make sure that they do not feel alone and that it's okay to ask those questions on how to get help. We want to go ahead and disrupt the developmental pathways towards partner violence. So of course, we want to be able to become aware of the signs. We want to be able to become aware of when those warning signs or red flags do show up. We want to go ahead and create protective environments, and then of course support survivors to increase safety and lessen harm. So we always want to listen and believe the survivor and provide them with whatever care they are looking for in that moment.
Does anyone have any questions about the safety concerns that we just went over? Talked about suicide, bullying, harassment, hate crimes, intimate partner violence. All right, we are going to dive into specific special populations, the first of which is the trans and gender nonconforming community. So trans and gender nonconforming youth often face challenges with identity and gender dysphoria. We also commonly report difficulty when seeking or receiving services. There are different processes to coming out as trans and transitioning. The first and most common one is a social transition. So the social transition, folks begin to assert a gender that differs from the sex they were assigned at birth. It can be done through clothing, choosing a new name, and using different pronouns. And then another form of transitioning is a medical transition. So this can be done through hormone replacement therapies and or gender affirmation surgeries. With this, it's important to know, like we mentioned before, different people will choose different things that fit best for them as an individual. Trans folks are not a monolith. Each individual has autonomy of their own self and their own processes. Also, something else to know, for a while, a little bit further back in the day, not further back in the day, some folks will ask trans folks if they've had the surgery. There isn't like one surgery. Gender affirmation surgeries, there are different ones for different body parts. It isn't like a one-off situation, if that makes sense. Just thought I would point that out. And then another type of transition is a legal transition. This can be super expensive, but it's changing your legal documents to reflect your chosen name and or gender identity. It's also changing gender markers on your driver's licenses, passports, insurances, etc. Yeah, so medical and legal transitions are a lot less accessible than social transitions, but they are different forms. Yeah, Liv, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, money. Medical and legal does take a lot of financial. It is a privilege to be able to get there, and a lot of folks don't have that ability to access it. But it doesn't if they choose and they want that, that's something to keep in mind as well too, is how inaccessible both of these transitions are to certain folks, due to like whether it be documentation or access to healthcare or even just those financial funds. So yeah.
I will also add for that money part, in terms of legally transitioning, there are name and gender marker clinics that help folks with the paperwork. And also Trans Lifeline has micro grants for folks who want to do that legal transition. They open the cycles, I think, on the 1st and the 15th of every month, and then they like help pay for people's legal transitions. So I'd plug that in.
That is new to me. I'm excited to hear more about that. Okay.
And then also a few years ago, there was a hashtag going around Twitter called #TransHealthFail. We have compiled a few of these tweets to show y'all some of the experiences our community has faced when trying to access health services. So this first one says, 3 years ago, I saw a gender therapist, a cis woman, who told me I wasn't trans enough to transition.
I just called Medi-Cal for the 5th time because they can't seem to get my new gender in their system.
So fun fact, not fun fact, I was giving a presentation to a bunch of service providers a little over a year ago, and they worked at a Medi-Cal clinic, and one of them was saying a client had been trying to change their gender marker for years, and Medi-Cal like took 2 years for it to finally change. So that's a little caveat for that. And then this person said, I had a doctor tell me the allergic reaction I was having to a diabetes drug was because of my hormones. So I was forced off of HRT for over a week and almost died because they refused to believe it was an allergic reaction and kept focusing on me being trans.
The time my therapist told me to get out of her office and never come back because I politely corrected her on my pronouns.
This pharmacist looking at estradiol, which is a form of hormone replacement therapy. I'm not sure what'll happen when a man takes this.
Goes to doctor for broken elbow. We have to put your real gender down just in case it's related, not the fake one.
And the last one we have on here is went to get my wisdom teeth pulled. The oral surgeon mocked me and misgendered me, thinking I was unconscious. The reason why we share these experiences with y'all is because your clients have likely faced similar things before getting to you. So sometimes society thinks or labels trans people as sensitive or as like overly emotional, but it's because your clients and our community are facing these things from all sides of life. So it's just something to keep in mind. So if you accidentally misgender someone and they have a stronger reaction, just keep this stuff in mind as like the stuff they're coming into the space with.
It might have just been the thing to, break the camel's back.
Yeah. I know this was a lot. Do folks have any like thoughts or comments about #TransHealthFail? Was it heavy? Was anything surprising?
I know they can be pretty shocking, so totally understand if y'all are still taking some time to reflect.
Yeah, so in terms of how we can help trans youth, as service providers, y'all can establish gender expansive non-discriminatory policies, can train staff in affirming practices related to gender and sexuality to avoid assumptions and better understand trans clients. There are a lot of assumptions that happen when someone is trans. So recognizing that we are not all the same and like being willing to listen to your client is super important. Respect and normalize use of pronouns, excuse me. Understand the client's right to self-determination. Don't assume that there is a connection between the presenting problem and gender identity. Like that #TransHealthFail with the diabetes medication, the two were not related, but the service providers kept linking the two. And then parents can help by accessing caregiver resources to increase education and capacity for support. And then also practice acceptance and understanding, not forcing youth to change or conform. I've seen this happen in a few different routes. I've had clients that I've worked with that have come out as trans whose parents told them that they were not allowed to express their gender identity outside of the home. So that's like one way of controlling youth. And then there are folks who go the completely opposite direction, where someone comes out as trans, the like family is super supportive, but supportive in a way where it pushes the youth to change everything immediately instead of taking it at their own pace. So it's important to like have the youth be in charge of their own story and their own timeline and progress, and supporting them with whatever they decide to do.
Mm-hmm.
And we also wanted to touch on gender dysphoria. We talked about it in terms of it being a clinical diagnosis, but it's also a term that a lot of trans folks use among peers. So among peers, it's a feeling of emotional distress that one's assigned sex is not in line with one's gender identity. This can be in terms of a body dysphoria or a social dysphoria. So when it's a body dysphoria, it's distress caused by feeling incongruence between one's sex characteristics and gender identity. For body dysphoria, sometimes folks will use binders or will tuck or do different things to hide certain parts of their bodies or like accentuate certain parts. Another form of dysphoria is social dysphoria, which is distress caused by being perceived or treated as a gender one does not identify with. Yeah, so those are the two kinds. And then dysphoria can be exacerbated and by misgendering and dead naming. And it's also important to note that not all trans and non-binary people will experience dysphoria. And on the flip side of dysphoria, there's a concept called gender euphoria, which is when someone is affirmed in their gender identity, the feeling of joy and euphoria that they receive in situations like that.
Sweet. So we're going to go ahead and talk about ASH. You've heard me rave about them earlier, but we're actually going to go ahead and watch one of their YouTube videos. They are a YouTube influencer, but they are also an advocate for the trans and non-binary and gender expansive community. So we're going to go ahead and hear their take on body and social dysphoria.
There are about 1.5 million quadrillion ways to be non-binary, and everyone's relationship with dysphoria is unique to them. For me, I've struggled with my hair, chest, hips, and a ton of social things. Let's talk about hair, because that dysphoria is completely gone. Before I cut my hair, I was constantly and debilitatingly fixated/anxious about my appearance because I could never recognize myself in the mirror. And I didn't even realize that was what was happening at the time. I just knew I didn't like what I was seeing. Back then, I used words like ugly, awkward, unattractive, and other descriptors, often associated with typical insecurities rather than dysphoria, because that was the language available to me. Now I understand that I didn't recognize myself because I felt my hair made me look like a woman, and I'm not a woman. At that point in my life, I never heard of an AFAB person looking at themselves and feeling a disconnect, mismatch, negative confusion, or thinking their appearance literally looked wrong before, unless they were a trans guy, and I'm not a trans guy. I also wasn't sure what it felt like to look right. That's why cutting my hair was so scary. What if I did it and felt no relief? A lot of trans men feel relief when they cut their hair, but again, not a trans man. Feminine gals get cute pixie cuts, but that definitely wasn't me either. And there are cis women who go short for a more masculine look, but I didn't want to be a masculine woman. Basically, most of my confusion and inability to name my gender dysphoria right away came from having minimal exposure to non-binary representation and/or healthy role models. What if I cut my hair and still felt this ugly weirdness forever? Thankfully, that didn't happen. I chopped it off, and since then, there have certainly been days I've felt like I looked hideous, and am hecka self-conscious, but that disconnect, or my hair is foreign to me feeling, was gone. Now when I feel not cute, at least it still looks like me. Cutting my hair was the first time I drastically felt dysphoria being relieved, so it was incredibly profound. For me, it cemented understanding the difference between being dysphoric about something and not liking a personal feature unrelated to dysphoria. Because I don't just blame everything I'm not into on dysphoria. For example, there's my period. While I dislike my period, I'm not dysphoric about it. I don't dig it. I get shitty cramps, cramps, nausea isn't fun, and I dislike spending cash money on menstrual products. All that being said, my period doesn't make me feel confused, unlike myself, or panicked because there's a distressing incongruency between what's happening to me and what should be happening. I don't feel less like my gender on my period. I'm still non-binary, I'm just bloated. Just because I'm whatever about my crimson tide doesn't mean that all NB people are. Some folks are very dysphoric about that time of the month. It's okay and valid for people to be different. More things I don't like but am not dysphoric about. My voice. I feel connected to my voice in the way that my brain thinks that my voice is my voice. But boy oh boy am I self-conscious about it. Whenever a video of mine finds its way outside my regular audience, my voice is the first thing they go for, viciously. I am aware that I sound unique, high-pitched, chipmunk-like, squeaky, expressive, annoying, and grating in some people's opinions. Comments have told me to go on testosterone even if it causes me dysphoria. Because my voice is a travesty and I should spare people from having to listen to it. Got it. So, while I kind of wish my voice was less polarizing, it doesn't cause me distress in relation to feeling as if it doesn't belong to me. It doesn't make me feel less non-binary. Dysphoria is more than just hating your body or some feature. It's about something making you feel uncomfortable because it conflicts with your gender. At least that's what it's like for me. It gets complicated when you're both insecure for non-dysphoric reasons and dysphoric about something simultaneously. I've had personal challenges with my relationship with weight that I've been working on and will keep working on for non-dysphoric reasons. But also, weight can make me feel dysphoric about my hips. Because in my head, prominent hips make me look like a woman, and I'm not a woman. Dysphoria and insecurity can be like a Venn diagram. Some things are totally separate, but overlap is possible. When you're non-binary, understanding what you might be dysphoric about versus what you just don't like, unrelated to dysphoria, can be confusing. Or it can be easy. It's easy for some people. My personal advice, feel free to take or leave it. If this stuff is really stressing you out, or you can't decide if you want to make a transitional change, especially an irreversible one, is don't rush into anything. Take your time if you can. Give all these feelings and thoughts room to breathe and eliminate outside expectation. You are not a weirdo if you decide to make a change. And you're not a disappointing not trans enough person if you decide not to. You don't have to do anything. And on the flip side, your body and yourself are yours. You have total agency to alter something, and there is no timeline you should be sticking to with any of this stuff. You are doing good as long as you're doing whatever makes you happy and healthy and keeps you safe. And approach choices slowly, thoughtfully, and safely. These issues can be tough. It's okay to not know, be unsure, or move gradually. You can also just sit in the not knowing. That's okay. You can just exist there. And you don't have to hide if you're not sure either. You can tell people, say,
"Hey, I'm unsure. I don't know what's going on. Want to talk to me about it?"
There's no pressure to do something if you're not ready or not sure. And if you're looking for external support, opening up to trusted loved ones, doctors, and licensed therapists can be helpful. I so recommend therapy to anyone who can access it. I also unapologetically asked my doctors 900,000 questions. Yay, I hope this pep talk helped at least one person. See you later. Okay, bye.
So that was Ash. That video was snippets of a longer YouTube video that we will provide the link for with the resources we send out. But what did y'all think? Any thoughts, comments? One of the things that stood out to me the first time I watched this video was when they were talking about how people told them to go on testosterone. Again, it's this like idea of folks trying to put people in these boxes and trying to get them to use different labels or do different things with their bodies to fit what they think that they should be doing. So I thought it was really interesting that Man said it's the same, something similar to that with people forcing him to, not forcing him, telling him to use they, them pronouns. Yeah. So I think it's an interesting parallel.
I always just take away from this, non-binary, just bloated. That's like my life. So I appreciate that they talk about that and how the ways in which we experience our body doesn't always reflect in the ways that we identify ourselves too. So yeah, I always love that piece. And I think they're super sweet. So, you know, one of my favorites.